Good morning and welcome everyone to today's full council meeting, and also those watching online. Councillors, before I get on to the business, and as we approach the 8th month of this dreadful coronavirus pandemic, which continues to affect the lives of our constituents, I wanted to take a moment to say a few words on your behalf as elected members, to publicly thank our officers, PKC staff, National Health, NHS, Tayside, PCAVs, the police and all the elected members and other partners involved for all their hard work during these very difficult, trying and challenging times these past few months. The Two Sisters plant in Cooper Angus were a great example of partnership working while supporting the employment and the employees of the company and the community of Cooper Angus at large. Chief Executive, we are all grateful for your staff's sterling efforts and commitments over the last several months. We just wanted to thank you. Councillors, I would confirm that it's intended to take a break following the consideration of item 4 on the agenda, and then further breaks, including a lunch break if necessary, during the consideration of the final report on the agenda. In the event of any required additional recesses for procedural purposes, members will be aware that separate arrangements have been put in place for individual groups as to hold discussions privately, if required, and with support from officers as necessary. As members were advised last week, to assist with the flow of the meeting and avoid the need for a recess as much as possible, members were asked to submit proposed motions or amendments for any of the reports on today's agenda to officers on a confidential basis earlier in the week, to allow consideration of their competency at that stage. I hope all members have taken advantage of this. Furthermore, as part of the consideration of item 5 on the agenda, I'm proposing that the requirements of the Order 57 be suspended for this particular item. The main report for item 5 asks members to consider several individual projects, each of which are detailed in the appendices. These distinct reports require to be annexed to the overarching report, to which they are intrinsically linked, in order that decisions relating to each project can be made in the context that they are currently part of the, existing capital programme of which they currently form part. This approach will enable open and flexible discussions as regards the possible direction from Council in relation to each project, and by linking them to the overarching report, the business of determining and any potential alternative views on the direction that the Council should give. In a similar fashion to when Council considers the local development plan, the suspension of Standing Order 57 allows the Council to consider and determine any amendments by voting, if necessary, on each of the individual projects, a stage at a time. Could members please indicate to me at this stage if they do not agree with this approach? Thank you. Can I just move on to ask Scott Henry to confirm apologies for the meeting today and take a roll call of attendance.
Thank you, Provost. Good morning, councillors. I can confirm we have apologies today from Councillor Harry Coates, and so far apologies from Councillor Mike Williamson, who's slightly delayed in starting but is hoping to join us soon. When I call out members' names, can you indicate by calling out that you are present? Councillor Ahern.
Present.
Councillor Anderson.
Present.
Councillor Bailey.
Present.
Councillor Baird.
Present.
Councillor Barnacle.
Present.
Councillor Barrett.
Present.
Councillor Braun.
Present.
Councillor Brock,
Present.
Councillor Audrey Coates, I believe Councillor Coates had just joined the meeting.
Yes, I'm here, Scott.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson,
Present.
Councillor Drysdale,
Present.
Councillor Duff,
Present.
Councillor Forbes,
Present.
Councillor Gray,
Present.
Councillor Illingworth,
Present.
Councillor James,
Present.
Councillor Jarvis,
Here.
Councillor Lang,
Present.
Councillor Lyle,
Present.
Councillor McCall,
Present.
Councillor McCall,
Present.
Councillor McDade,
Present.
Councillor McEwen,
Present.
Councillor Parrott,
Present.
Councillor Pover,
Present.
Councillor Purvis,
Present.
Councillor Rebeck,
Present.
Councillor Reid,
Present.
Councillor Robertson,
Present.
Councillor Sarwar,
Present.
Councillor Shires,
Present.
Councillor Simpson,
Present.
Councillor Stewart,
Present.
Councillor Waters,
Present.
and Councillor Wilson.
Present.
Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Scott. Members, can I ask, are there any declarations of interest on the agenda today? Councillor Lyle, are you? Councillor Lyle?
Good morning.
Good morning. Sorry, I just looked as if you wanted to say something.
No.
Okay.
No.
If there are no declarations of interest, I'll now pass you over to Deputy Provost Kathleen Baird to take the papers.
Yeah. Sorry, Provost, just to confirm, some councillors have indicated in the chat that there are some declarations to declare.
Councillor Rebeck.
Thanks, Provost. I have a non-financial interest as a member of the board on Live Active Leisure.
Thank you. Scott, could you take a note of these? Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Provost. Again, I have a non-financial interest on the board of Live Active Leisure.
Thank you. Councillor McEwen.
Again, it's a non-financial interest as a director of Live Active Leisure.
Thank you. Councillor Parrott.
Thank you. A non-financial interest as a member of the board of Culture Perth Kinross.
Thank you. Councillor Rebeck, did I take you?
You did.
Yeah. Councillor Hearn.
Yeah, non-financial interest as a board member of Culture Perth and Kinross.
Thank you. Councillor Jarvis. Councillor Jarvis.
It's all right, I'm awake. Lost the curse as usual. I'm a member of PKC.
Thank you.
No, CPK.
CPK.
The right way round.
Councillor Pover.
Non-financial interest in Culture Perth and Kinross.
Thank you very much. Is that everybody? Fine. Thank you very much.
Excuse me, Provost, I don't think you managed to get me for my declaration of interest. Did it come up?
I can't see it.
Apologies, I definitely sent it.
I'm sure you did, but it's not up. Councillor Wilson.
Just a non-financial interest in the Culture of Perth and Kinross board. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wilson, did you say you had something?
No, Provost.
Okay, that's lovely. Thanks very much. Okay, I'll hand you over now to the Deputy Provost. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. Good morning, councillors. We now come to the medium-term financial plan, and I'd like to invite Stuart McKenzie, Head of Finance, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Deputy Provost, and good morning, councillors. The medium-term financial plan models optimistic, mid-range and pessimistic scenarios to provide a broad indication of a financial challenge which the council may face over the next 6 years. The scale of potential challenge over the 6-year period 2021 to 2027, modelled within the plan, ranges from effectively break-even to circa £136 million, with a mid-range scenario of just over £60 million. In light of COVID-19, the current degree of uncertainty surrounding public finances at both a UK and Scottish level is unprecedented. This report was issued prior to last week's cancellation of the UK Government's autumn statement. COSLA are currently in discussion with Scottish Government officials on how this announcement will impact upon the timing of the Scottish budget and, in turn, next year's local government finance settlement. The Council does, however, need to consider how it will develop both its revenue and capital budgets going forward, and how the Council's resources can best be aligned to both support and be informed by the Perth Kinross offer. The medium-term financial plan focuses primarily on revenue expenditure, with the investment blueprint and capital budget being the subject of a separate report to this meeting of the Council. The assumptions used to model each scenario are set out in section 4 of the report. The assumptions on pay inflation and future council tax levels are unchanged from those included within the approved provisional budgets for 2021-22 and 2022-23 agreed in March. Adjustments have, however, been made for possible increase in employers' pension costs and for potential reduction in future Scottish Government grant funding, given the impact of COVID-19 on the Scottish economy and the likely prioritisation of spending on health and social care. As highlighted by our external auditors, the Council has a strong track record in longer-term financial planning, and consideration of a medium-term financial plan today forms part of this process. In recent years, the Council has set a financial budget for the coming year and detailed provisional budgets for years 2 and 3 as part of its longer-term planning. The 22-23 provisional budget remains in place, and the report notes the intention to return to considering multi-year budgets from 2022-23 onwards. However, given the unprecedented financial certainty over income, pressures, funding, indeed the timing of the Scottish budget, and the issues surrounding the in-year budget position, and the challenges presented by the current situation, including the potential of having to respond to both COVID-19 and severe weather over the winter months, it is recommended that for the coming budget round, work is focused on preparing the 21-22 revenue budget only. The mid-range scenario shows a potential savings requirement in 21-22 of £16.4 million. This will be refined as budget submissions are updated in detail. Within this amount is a corporate savings target of approximately £9.1 million for 21-22, reflecting changes in Scottish Government funding assumptions of just over £5 million, potential increases in employers' pension costs of around £1 million, and a £3 million underlying funding gap in the approved 21-22 provisional budget. As part of the preparation of the 21-22 provisional budget, approval is sought to remit to the Executive Officer team of identifying options to address this corporate savings target. Section 7 of the report provides an update on the Council's reserves position following completion and approval of the Council's 2019-20 audited accounts. And Section 8 seeks approval to prepare for housing revenue and capital budgets in accordance with normal timescales. The report also provides commentary on workforce planning measures, asset management, and significant risks which may impact upon the Council's future revenue position. The medium-term financial plan has been prepared for planning purposes and contains a number of assumptions which will be superseded as more information becomes available, and further work is undertaken on the provisional budget. I would emphasise that nothing within the report commits the Council to a given position on pay or other inflation or on council tax levels. These strategic decisions remain to be set by Council in approving the final 21-22 revenue budget in February next year. Happy to take questions, Deputy Provost.
Thank you, Stuart. Are there any questions from members on this report? Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. got in at last. Right, can I thank Stuart Mackenzie and his team for this report. It obviously covers the period up until 26-27, but it also has clear implications later on for the investment blueprint covering 30 years. What I want to ask, though, is on some of the underlying assumptions. And the one that really does strike me, and I don't know if it'll be Stuart or David Littlejohn that responds on this, and that's on demographics. That's on page 27. And it states the overall population of Perth and Kinross is anticipated to reduce by around 1.5% over the next 25 years. I think that's the first time I've seen that. It certainly is different from when I was elected 3 years ago. But it's based upon the National Registers of Scotland forecasts. Do we look at any other forecasting services on demographics? Because it is so important in terms of the projections we make on a whole number of matters.
I can answer that question, Councillor Donaldson. The National Records of Scotland is the official source of all data, so they gather intelligence for a variety of sources, but they compile data, particularly from the census, and use the base census as the basis of forecasting. It is, however, a forecast, and the further out those forecasts go, there is a higher degree of inaccuracy. I think the biggest change that we're seeing going forward is probably the effect of migration and the potential to have reduced inward migration over the longer term, and that's where the principal change will come from. As you'll be aware, Scotland's population has largely been growing due to in-migration rather than natural births.
Yes, that's what I was assuming. Just as a follow-up question, it's primarily due to inward migration, but there's a significant difference between now and 3 years ago. But can I also ask David, in the next part, however, within these overall projections, the population aged over 65 is projected to grow by around 32.5%. I assume that's over 25 years. If I look at page 39, however, our mid-range projections on older people, we've got between 2.5%. In fact, we've even got, I can only assume it's a typo, for 26-27, we're going from 3.3 to, in the space of 1 year, to 6.6. But if you average that out, even just at 2%, this actually comes out quite a bit higher than 35%. Just to comment. Certainly, 26-27 figure must be wrong.
I would need. It does seem particularly high. I would need to check that. It does seem particularly high. I mean, clearly our population is growing proportionally. Our older age population is growing proportionally faster than many other parts of Scotland, but that does seem a particularly large increase. So I'll certainly check those figures, Councillor Donaldson.
The reason I ask is I do think it's important. I know to some it might just be a whole lot of figures. It's actually quite important in terms of the assumptions we make, especially in terms of long-term planning.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Parrott.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. My question is very similar. It's on paragraph 1126 with regard to the population aged over 65. The business of it increasing by about a third over the projected period. What is the absolute percentage of that segment of the population at the moment? Thank you.
Well, I don't know the answer, but again, we can certainly find out. I don't have the actual figure in front of me, so I can certainly provide that to you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Bailey.
And thank you for the report. I just had a question regarding the, so my understanding is that it's proposed that we don't set set revenue budgets for years 2 and 3 in the next budget setting cycle. I wonder if we could have some detail of the specific challenges that officers would face if they were called upon to set a revenue budget for years 2 and 3. Thank you.
Thank you. Stuart, are you able to answer that?
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I'm happy to take that question. Thank you. Good question, Councillor Bailey. So as you rightly say, over the last few years, the Council has set a final budget, as it is required to do for the coming year, and provisional budgets in detail for years 2 and 3. And we're one of few councils who actually prepare budgets at that level of detail for forward years. Some of the challenges are familiar. I'll speak first simply of the financial assumptions and the financial challenges. Some of the challenges are familiar in terms of we don't have advance forward funding figures for the Scottish Government grant funding, and that's very much tied into the Scottish Government's own position in terms of the information it receives from the UK Government. But what we have this year, and as a reflection really of the experience of the COVID period, is we don't have the same degree of certainty over our other income streams, and they are significant. And take council tax and that, and we'll touch upon that in the next report. We don't have any certainty of what our expenditure pressure, we don't have the same degree of certainty of what our expenditure pressures might be. There's also the issue of the impact or potentially on our supply chain of a withdrawal from the European Union towards the end of the year. And we don't have, as we've had for the last 2 years, a fixed long-term pay agreement. So there are a number of really key and important financial variables where we actually have less information and a great deal more uncertainty than we've had in previous years. There's also the issue of addressing the challenges in the current year, and they haven't gone away, and I'm sure members will have questions on the next report on the agenda. And finally, there's simply the logistical challenge of the fact that the preparation of the budget is not purely led by finance officers. It's a genuinely collegiate approach, with all members of the executive officer team contributing. And those colleagues have been heavily involved in the response to COVID-19, and their time may, unfortunately, for reasons beyond their control, be redirected to continue that response. So the intention is not to dilute our approach to medium-term financial planning. In fact, we're discussing a medium-term financial plan. I hope evidences that to elected members. It is simply a pragmatic approach in the coming year's budget round.
Thank you very much, Stuart, for that very comprehensive answer, which should be helpful for members. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Provost Depute. I wanted to refer to the section on page 13, section 4.16 to 421 regarding inflation and the different inflationary scenarios that are commented on there. I wanted to ask, has any analysis been done on what a no-deal Brexit and the introduction of WTO tariffs would do to the major and big ticket items of council expenditure? The report mentions energy and fuel, but food could also come into this, and the scale of those tariffs would dwarf the inflationary assumptions of between 2 and 9%.
I'll take that initially, Deputy Provost, and if any colleagues wish to comment further, because I know that work is ongoing on the arrangements for the the UK's withdrawal from the EU, one way around there. Thank you, Councillor Barrett, for your question. I'm not doing well, am I? The assumptions which are modelled in the medium-term financial plan are about general inflation rather than specific inflation, and specific inflation can obviously be somewhere ahead of general inflation. The issues that you're raising, and definitely in terms of food, I think is well acknowledged, and my understanding is that Tayside Contracts have done some work on that as our supplier. So when we come to doing the detailed update of the revenue budget, those are factors that we'll need to consider, but that will very much be determined by the ultimate position and the terms in which the UK leaves the European Union later this year.
Thank you. Chief Executive would like to answer.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Councillor Barrett, we are aiming to have an EU exit briefing session for all elected members in forthcoming weeks, so we can set out what the key risks are as they may impact on Perth and Kinross Council and indeed our citizens and residents. We'll be able to pick up that specific point that you make, and hopefully we'll have some clarity in coming days and weeks to add to the briefing session. Thank you, Deputy Provost.
Thank you. Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. My question relates to page 8 and the graph at the bottom of that regarding various scenarios for bouncing back the public finances. Now that we are in effectively in a second wave, I'm just wondering, is the so-called upside scenario now virtually unachievable, and in effect the central scenario is now the upside one? And if that is the case, will that have an effect on our assumptions, particularly our optimistic assumptions?
I'm happy to take a response to that, Deputy Provost. And thank you, Councillor Braun, for your question. The graphs are based on the modelling which the Office for Budget Responsibility undertook earlier in the year, and as you can see, they set out 3 scenarios. I think the Office of Budget Responsibility themselves, I saw an interview fairly recently with the chairman of the OBR. The optimistic bounce back scenario is now looking perhaps too optimistic in their own terms. So I think, as the Chancellor's recently said, there's a long-term adjustment to not only the UK economy but global economies coming on the back of COVID-19. The reason that the performance of the economy is important for public finances is obviously in terms of tax revenues and the amount of money it's available to distribute. So that impacts on the Scottish Government's budget, potentially in terms of the devolved settlement. But a significant amount of the resources available within the Scottish budget and to the Scottish Government are determined by taxes either devolved or assigned to Scotland. And the challenges within the economy and the potential, and we've seen negative block grant adjustments recently published. Those challenges are part of the reason why we're suggesting a more cautious approach in terms of what our Scottish Government grant funding might look like going forward.
Thank you very much. Now I know
that
Peter Marshall has some figures that might be useful that Councillor Parrott was asking, so can I ask Peter Marshall to give us these figures? Thank you.
Yes, hello, Deputy Provost. I have the 2018 population projections, which are the most recent ones. If we look at the over 65 age group in terms of percentages, as of 2018, it stood at 23.6%. By 2000 and what's the year here? 42-43, it has risen to, excuse me, I'm just flicking through the figures here, 32% of the total population.
Okay, thank you.
I hope that helps.
Chief Executive is suggesting that we have a more comprehensive briefing about that later, so that would probably suffice just now. So thank you very much for that. Okay, Councillor Ahern.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Stuart may not be able to answer this, but with inpatient mental health being taken back into the NHS was a significant part of the IJB budget. Is it likely to affect our contribution to the IJB in the future? And what is this likely to do with the overspend that PKC are required to fund?
Deputy Provost, can I take that one?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Councillor Ahern. The transition back into the NHS of the operational responsibility for inpatient mental health services which was concluded in June this year, led to the budget being transferred out of the IJB back to the NHS board, and with it the substantial overspend that had been incurred as a result of the costs of locum psychiatrists. So this in effect brings down the IJB's overspend, but in relation to the health rather than the social care contribution.
Thank you. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you. I've just got one question, but before I do, I'm actually slightly I can't believe that this Conservative administration has actually allowed negative thoughts and negative statements to be made in this report about Brexit, when you all know as a Conservative party that
Excuse me, Councillor Robertson, this is a question. This is not time for comment. You get your comment after, so just question.
All right, I'll give you my comment then, or my question. I was going to ask you about the current economic climate as outlined in section 1122. As we know that both retail practices and also working practices are going to change immeasurably and are not going to go back to the way they were before. So I think we will have a real problem with generating income, and I'd like to know more about how bad we think that might be.
Thank you. Stuart, are you able to take this question?
Thank you, Deputy Provost. If I can assure elected members that there's no political intent in any context within the medium-term financial plan. We are merely trying to provide commentary on the potential risks to the Council. Councillor Robertson, thank you very much for your question. I think there will be a significant challenge to the Council and indeed organisations in generating income going forward, both in terms of maybe the potential demand for some services, but also I think just in terms of a recovery of income, given the impact that we're expecting on the local economy. So if you look at the next report, and I don't want to do too much twirling here, we are identifying quite a significant loss of income or under recovery of income in the current year, and that may well be a little bit of a recurring trend. I would hope some of that will pick up. The housing market is currently very buoyant, but there will be challenges in generating income going forward, and I suspect particularly around about local tax income.
Thank you. Councillor Purvis.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I'll refrain from saying that I have every confidence in the Prime Minister's ability to get a deal by the end of the year. But my question follows on from Councillor Bailey's question in relation to three-year budget setting. I was also concerned about this when I read it in the paper. My question specifically is that while noting the concerns about our ability to do that longer-term financial planning and have all the detail, given that transformation projects and other long-term savings often take a number of years to come to fruition, within this recommendation, would it still be competent for elected members at the budget meeting in February to give direction about some of the future savings over a longer period that we would like officers to consider?
Thank you. Stuart.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I don't know if the Chief Executive wishes to comment. I think she has on the chat.
Yes, Chief Executive.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Councillor Purvis, yes, it would be competent for elected members to do as you describe. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Two questions, I think. First on section 515 of the report, under the Perth Kinross Integration Joint Board. There's a sentence in there which says that discussions remain ongoing with all three parties, NHS, Tayside, the Council and the IJB, as to the potential implications for the Council's revenue budget process. And I just wondered what the specific implications for the Council's budget process were.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart, and I don't know if colleagues would wish to comment further, but what we were referring to is a discussion which has been ongoing for some time around risk sharing between the respective parts of the budgets.
Okay, thank you. I thought it probably was the risk sharing. I just wanted to clarify. And my second question is on the assumptions around the council tax charge. I think we actually mean the change in the council tax charge. This is in Appendix B. Just until I think 2 years ago, the council tax rise was capped at 3%, whereas we are now in a pessimistic situation, assuming a rise of 3% going up to 4.7%. I just wonder if it's appropriate, given that, as I say, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the council tax rise was capped at 3%, that is now at the pessimistic end of the assumptions, and probably just maybe suggest as well that the definition of pessimistic being 3% and optimistic being 4.7% is probably different for a public sector organisation than somebody actually paying the council tax.
Stuart, yep.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I'm happy to take that question. And Councillor Stewart, I can assure you that the terminology is not intended to be pejorative in that context. It is simply fairly common practice to reference optimistic, pessimistic and mid-range scenarios when doing economic forecasts, as you'll appreciate. If I can context my response in terms of last year's position. So last year, the Scottish Government guidance was to allow for 3% increase, which when adjusted in real terms equated to an upper limit of 4.84%. And 19 local authorities last year set council tax at 4.84%. So that's the context in which both that and the approved position in the provisional budget is the context in which these figures have been developed. But as I concluded in my opening remarks, there is nothing within the medium-term financial plan which inhibits or restricts what elected members may choose to agree in finalising next year's budget.
Sorry, just to be clear, Mr. Mackenzie, given that, as I say, council tax was previously capped at 3%, should that be the pessimistic situation, or should that be a mid-range? Because again, council tax rises could once again become capped at 3% over the period of the medium-term financial plan. I just wonder whether it's wise to set that at the bottom end rather than somewhere in a mid-range scenario.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. I've no forward information on what the parameters might be for council tax for next year, but certainly last year it was 4.84%. I can't recall what the limits were the previous year, but they were in excess of 3%. And I can get that information to you.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Reid, I notice you've put a C in the box. Is this a comment? Because if it's a comment, I'll be waiting till after Councillor Lyle has moved the report. So,
yeah, it is a comment.
Right, thank you. Councillor Barnacle, you have a question?
Yes, it's more of a clarification, really, Deputy Provost, possibly from Stuart. Paragraph 443 talks about the mid-range estimated level of savings at 16.5 million for 21-22, but then in 513 we have the action to identify savings of 9.116 million, which is explained in paragraph 510 based upon risk, assumed risk. Maybe you explained it before, there's a difference there, Stuart. Am I reading it right that we're we're operating on the 513 paragraph, effectively, not the 443 mid-range figure.
Happy to take that, Deputy Provost. Thank you very much, Councillor Barnacle. You're absolutely correct. We're working on 5.13, which is £9.116 million. If I can explain very briefly the difference, and we did try to cover it in the accompanying narrative, and I apologise if it's not clear to elected members. What we're doing in arriving at the optimistic, mid-range and pessimistic scenarios is two things. One, building in an estimation of what the corporate savings target might be, but also factoring in what the expenditure pressures might be for services. So the difference between the 16.4 and the 9.1 is a very broad brush estimate of everything else that the council may have to deal with in addressing the overall budget. And those figures, and apologies, we're presenting this in terms of strategic objectives, those figures will change as we get through the detailed work on the budget. So it's a very broad brush estimate of 16.4, but what we have is a specific recommendation that council approve corporate savings target of £9.1 million.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you. I see that there are no further questions in the chat box, so I would thank Stuart and other officers for answering the questions, and I will ask Councillor Lyle to move the report, please.
Good morning and thank you, Deputy Provost. First of all, I'd like to thank the officers for their hard work in bringing forward this report in particularly challenging circumstances. The recent annual audit report from KPMG, our external auditors, states, and I quote, "The Council have built on existing strong financial management and have developed financial models to demonstrate long-term planning. The medium-term financial plan is integral to the strong financial management of council resources, and we have been praised for this work. It sets out the broad direction of travel for the council and includes high-level commentary on the macroeconomic conditions that may influence public sector funding over the medium term. The medium-term financial plan includes the best estimates currently available, and these will undoubtedly be reviewed and refreshed between now and February. However, never has been the public sector finances been so uncertain. As we have just had explained, the impact of COVID-19 on our economy and communities may not be fully known, I suspect, for some years to come. The medium-term financial plan also signals the formal commencement of the revenue and capital budget process, and Deputy Provost Guy would like to commend the medium-term financial plan to the Council. Thank you.
Can I invite Councillor Duff to second the report, please?
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I would also like to thank the Chief Accountant and Head of Finance for this comprehensive and well-structured report on the issues facing this Council in trying to determine its financial plans. As members will appreciate, the large number of currently unknown outcomes makes forecasting the Council's financial landscape going forward extremely difficult. The practice of using 3 forecasts highlighting the optimistic, pessimistic and mid-range scenarios is a helpful, if sobering, procedure, and one which assists members to see the range of assumptions and their possible impacts over the next 6 years. Thankfully, while the information in the report is considerable, complex and somewhat mysterious in places, the recommendations are few in number, clear and transparent. Deputy Provost, I'm happy to second the Leader of the Council's motion.
Thank you very much. Now open up for comments. Councillor Reid, you to comment?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Provost. And I'm very aware I'm probably going to be breaking the 11th commandment, namely, thou shalt not criticise the NHS. But I do believe, and I'm referring to paragraph 2.9, it's very important that we keep a very close eye on the NHS finances. And I say that from personal experience, having recently returned to the operating theatre to assist in this situation we're in. I've been very aware that a huge amount of money has been saved by the NHS by the lack of clinical activity in not doing elective work, and they're probably saving up millions of pounds in their coffers. And I think that they owe social care a significant debt by having offloaded a huge number of very vulnerable patients out of the NHS into social care. And I just want to commend it to those who are looking after our finances, that we do need to watch that the NHS does not borrow from us inappropriately. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Parrott.
Thank you very much, Deputy Provost. I just want to return to the population figures, because hidden in the figure of the increasing proportion of the elderly population is the fact that the number of working age people supporting that elderly population will drop over the next 25 years from about 2.5 to 1.5. As an area that naturally attracts older people, in our other work, we must do all that we can to attract a younger working age population, because that will only be to the benefit of our medium-term financial plans going forwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Provost Depute. I seriously fear that describing the future outlook for local government as highly uncertain, as in paragraph 3.7 of the report, doesn't capture how grim our financial situation will be. As previous speakers have mentioned, paragraph 4.43 sets out eye-watering savings requirements of £45 million over the coming 4 years. And unfortunately, the programme for government from the Scottish Government does nothing to suggest that their chokehold exercised upon local government is going to be lifted with any meaningful financial and fiscal empowerment.
Councillor Barrett, I think you've muted yourself. Sorry.
Apologies yes. For that, Deputy Provost. I think the report concludes that we will instead be subject to both real terms and cash cuts to our budgets. And if you thought that it was bad in the good times, I suspect that we ain't seen nothing yet. Provost, we've discussed several times previously how the Wigan deal evolved during a period of severe financial reduction and cuts. I fear that the Perth Kinross offer is going to be curtailed by a similar level of scarcity of resource in the face of significant increases in demand for services cited within this plan, and where we're going to be shortchanged on the cost of COVID. The pace and urgency of the conversations between our council and our communities needs to be ramped up again, and community groups pausing for breath after the first wave of COVID are maybe not yet sure that the second wave has already hit us earlier than expected, and as we're not nearly into winter, and that this wave could last longer and strike deeper. We've already seen the level of universal credit claims more than double in number, and demands on the Scottish Welfare Fund jump by 50%, both in number and in value. And we need to look once again to retasking staff, to mobilising communities and volunteers to pull together to look after one another for both the next 6 months and the next 3 years if we're to come out the other end of COVID and Brexit in one piece. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Barrett. I don't see any other anyone wishing to make a comment. Councillor Donaldson. Oh, they're not coming fast. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you. I'll just say quickly, another council meeting, another attack by Councillor Barrett on the Scottish Government. I think he should recognise that the proposals put forward by the Scottish Finance Secretary, Kate Forbes, were rejected by the UK Treasury, and short of independence, we are dependent, whether he likes it or not, on Barnett consequentials and on UK Treasury money. So we are constrained. Can I just welcome the statement by the Chief Executive that there will be an EU exit briefing session. We looked at the issue in the economic recovery paper several weeks ago, I'm sure there will be stuff on paper coming forward, but an actual session on the issue really would be helpful, because simply it's the uncertainties, and despite the unalloyed optimism of Councillor Purves about Prime Minister Johnson, I don't think many of us share that optimism. We may get some kind of fudge deal, who knows, but it's the actual uncertainty that's we're in just now and have been for a year, for 2 years, for 3 years, really has damaged business investment, business confidence, and the very fact that we are breaching international law now because of the new internal market bill really certainly does not help. David Littlejohn alluded to one of the factors, and we need to look at that at the briefing session on the demographic figures, is the question of migration, and that clearly has changed the picture and changed it considerably over the last 3 years. I certainly, and I'm grateful Peter Marshall providing more figures, and I think I'll come back to him on that, because we do need that for the budget review process later on. We've got to get a clear kind of idea of population projections, but we're going to have to, certainly in the investment blueprint, continuously update on that. But I do question, there's no doubt the percentage of the population over 65, and remember, many of them will be active and make a major contribution to our community. So there's a lot of positives there, but will be 32% in 25 years. It doesn't quite tie in with the figures that are showing here. I think that's and certainly that figure for 26-27 must be wrong, with 6.6% to the mid-range. But I think it's important in terms of planning. I hear also what's said in terms of all the various variables. For instance, on inflation, if you come back 25 years ago to 1995, I think if you had been talking of inflation of the order of 1.5 to 2%, the possibility of negative interest rates, no one, certainly in the investment world, would have believed you. And it will change again, whether we go to deflation or much more likely to higher rates of inflation. But it's something we've got to factor in going forward and be aware of. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Donaldson, but we must remember and keep our comments relating to the paper. So thank you. Councillor Lane.
Thanks, Deputy Provost. Yes, I'm going to steer well clear of politics outside Perth Kinross. I welcome this paper.
Councillor Lane, I appreciate that.
I welcome this paper being brought forward. We, as we all know, at Perth Kinross have a lot of we're at the bottom of the chain, deciding about how much finance we get through the various governments. So we have to deal with what we've got. And this paper takes a stab at it. And obviously, with working together with the officers, we will have to work with what we've got. At this stage, there's so much uncertainty in so many areas about funding and where we're going to be as a society moving out of this. And I thank the officers for bringing that forward, and I'm sure that it will be continually updated. Maybe we used to only be annually, but I think we're now moving it's monthly and sometimes weekly, the way the finances are going. So just want to thank the officers for bringing it forward, and I'm sure we'll be getting updates probably much more regularly than we usually do. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lane. Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Deputy Provost. I had given prior notice of a potential amendment regarding the setting of a 3-year budget, but I noticed that was dealt with in question. So I'm very reassured by the answer to Councillor Purvis's question. I think in relation to the question that I asked of the Head of Finance about council tax rates, I would have a concern. We're aware that there is a Holyrood election next year. I would be concerned that I mean, there could easily be a change of administration at Holyrood, the assumptions around council tax, or sorry, the what is permitted to local authorities around council tax in terms of raising the rate on a year-on-year basis could easily change or be capped again. And I think that I would just like to flag up to members that there's a risk that 3% is not the appropriate pessimistic assumption around, or bottom end of the range assumption around council tax rises in future years. Councillor Purvis back in March put forward our budget, which demonstrated that it was perfectly possible to set a budget with 0% council tax rises while still making over £10 million worth of new investment in different areas. So it's really just to flag up that concern that I have and a potential risk around that to fellow elected members. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barnacle.
Yes, thanks, Deputy Provost. I too will keep off the wider politics despite reference to Brexit and independence from earlier speakers. There'll be another time to debate that, and I suspect we should debate it as a separate issue in due course. But really the main point that I want to make is around the population projections, particularly Councillor Parrott's comment about the ageing population. And I do wonder if we should, in forward planning, reconsider our proposals for what is quite a considerable level of growth in the area that's been embedded in the planning system. And maybe we should look at more sustainable levels of development going forward so that we don't have a huge demographic problem, or less of one, shall we say, if we're more realistic about our sustainable development going forward. I'd ask planning to note that comment because I think it's relevant to this discussion.
Thank you very much. Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. A very brief comment from myself. I'd just like to firmly disassociate myself from Councillor Reid's rather ill-informed and ill-advised comments on NHS Tayside finances, and I'm happy to sit down with him offline to tell him what the real picture is. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Reid, I know you want to come back, but I really don't want it to become this spat between two councillors. So if it's only to reply to Councillor Drysdale, I'd rather it was done offline. Thank you. Okay. I see no.
Just to say, I wasn't referring to NHS Tayside.
Deputy Provost, could I perhaps make a
yes,
comment?
thank you, Chief Executive.
Thank you. I want to clarify for elected members, Councillor Purvis asked if it was appropriate to bring forward suggestions in the budget setting process for 21-22 that may go into future years. And just to be absolutely crystal clear, it is a matter for elected members to bring forward any motion or amendment they choose to do so. Officers will provide the best possible advice on whether those motions or amendments are indeed competent. Thank you, Deputy Provost.
Thank you. Councillor James, I see you wish to make a comment.
Yeah, sorry, Deputy Provost, it will be very brief. I mean, it does make for grim reading looking forward. It's been one of those years. 2020 has been a grim year, and you know, nothing we can do about it. But what I am reassured with is that our finance team and our officers that deal with this budget and all council work and finances on a daily basis, I feel absolutely safe in their hands, and I'd like to thank them for the sterling work they have done and continue to do.
Thank you very much, Councillor James. I see no further members wishing to make comment, so are we happy to agree this report?
Agreed.
Thank you very much.
Agreed.
Okay. We now move on to the revenue budget. And once again, I'm going to ask Stuart Mackenzie, Head of Finance, to introduce this report. Stuart, over to you.
Thank you, Deputy Provost, and I apologise to elected members. I'm not really going to be in the habit of being a bearer of good news. This report provides an update on the current year's revenue budget, and in particular on the latest estimate of the impact of COVID-19 upon the Council's finances. And it's a little bit of a theme in these papers, but the situation remains extremely fluid, both in terms of the potential cost of the Council's response to COVID-19 and the funding available to meet this. And on this point, elected members will be aware of the announcement yesterday of just under £1.1 billion of Scottish Government funding for health and social care, and colleagues are currently seeking to clarify the implications for Perth Kinross. This report, therefore, represents an update at a point in time, and the position and proposed mitigating action will continue to be reviewed and reported to the Strategic Policy Resources and to Council. As detailed in Section 2, the projected impact of COVID-19 on Council expenditure is £10.8 million, largely reflecting additional expenditure in social care, welfare and the return to school-based education. The impact on budgeted income from fees and charges is estimated at £4.9 million, including income from services the Council was unable to deliver during lockdown. A further £1.6 million in approved savings is not expected to be realised this year. Council tax collection in August was 1.35% down on the equivalent position last year. Perth Kinross, however, has the second highest percentage of employees furloughed in Scotland. It is not yet clear how the end of the furlough scheme in October or the recently announced job support scheme will impact on local employability and household incomes. Potential reductions in council tax collection of between 2% and 6%, or £1.9 million to £5.7 million, have therefore been included in the estimates. Although all council tax levied remains due to the Council, recovery in future years may prove more challenging. Together with pressures on the Council's arm's length external organisations, Housing Revenue Account and Car Park Trading Account, the gross financial impact of COVID-19 is currently estimated to be in the range of £22.4 million to £26.8 million. Section 3 of the report sets out potential mitigation measures to help address this position. To date, the Council has been advised of additional Scottish Government funding of approximately £12.6 million to support the response to COVID-19. Elected members are requested to approve allocating this funding towards meeting the pressures set out in this report. In line with Scottish Government guidance, it is also proposed that £2 million of early learning and childcare funding be applied to support the Council's response. Based upon the latest revenue monitoring position, a net underspend of approximately £3.9 million has been identified, which may be applied to offset the financial impact of COVID-19. An update on the revenue monitoring position will be provided to the Strategic Policy and Resources Committee in November. Pressures on the housing revenue account are assumed to be contained within existing budget, and the projected loss of income and car parking met from the earmarked reserve for parking. The remaining potential funding gap in 2020-21 is therefore currently estimated at between £1.7 million to £6.1 million. Apologies. This estimate should be considered as highly provisional. It does not allow for additional expenditure to support recovery and renewal or economic well-being, nor the cost of responding to local outbreaks or changes in service delivery which may be required by the Scottish Government. There are, however, further potential mitigation measures which may be available to the Council, as set out in Section 5. Of significance are discussions with the Scottish Government on implementing a local government income compensation scheme, modelled on the scheme introduced in England. The details of any Scottish scheme remain to be confirmed, and Council will be kept updated on progress. Elected members are also requested to approve the adjustments to the Council's 2020-21 revenue management budget arising from the previous year's final accounts, from funding announcements and from the in-year management of Council expenditure, as set out in section 6 and appendices 1 to 3 of the report. To conclude, the full impact of COVID-19 on the Council's revenue budget remains uncertain, and elected members will be provided with regular updates on both the latest cost projections and mitigating action. Happy to take questions, boss.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Open up to questions. Give you a second or two to put the question. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Provost Depute. With regard to page 48 of the report, sections 216 and 17, and the impact on arm's length external organisations, can I ask how much has the Council laid out in support to Live Active Leisure, Culture, Perth and Kinross and Horsecross, and over what period of time in terms of the monthly support that we've provided, which would seem to demonstrate agile government locally, and can I ask how much has the Scottish Government provided to Perth and Kinross Council from the Scottish consequentials of the UK loss of income scheme for arts and culture organisations?
Thank you very much. That's quite a few questions for Stuart there.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I may have to delegate some of those. I wonder if my colleague Scott Walker has the ALIO figures to hand.
So thank you, Councillor Barrett. The Council's maintained its normal monthly service level agreement payments to all three arm's length external organisations. I don't have the exact figures to hand, but roughly about £500,000 to LL each year, each month. I think it's about £100,000 to Horsecross, etc. So we've kept paying our SLA contracts to keep them solvent over the last 6 months.
Thank you.
And the second part of the question, please, which was how much have we received from the Scottish Government in terms of the consequentials for the loss of income scheme for arts organisations?
So there's a table. I mean, I think Fiona Robertson's on this as well, but I think it's the £750,000 from the Venues Fund at the table at 217.
Fiona Robertson, I think, wishes to answer this. Thank you, Fiona.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Yes, that is correct. In addition, all three of the ALIOs have received various funding packages, emergency funding packages from the different emergency funds which have been put in place by either UK government or Scottish government. So, for example, small business grant support. The biggest beneficiary has been Horsecross Arts, which has secured just over £800,000 in total, most of which is from the Venue Relief Fund, as Scott Walker's mentioned, but also from other sources as well.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Deputy Provost. It was two brief questions just to clarify something, clarify a couple of things. In 5.4 of the report relating to the UK government's local government income compensation scheme, I think we generally refer to it as the loss of income scheme. It says that that is for income that would have been generated in the delivery of services in 21-22. That should be 2021, shouldn't it? Just to confirm.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. That is indeed a typographical error. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. And the other question is in 6.2, the audited annual accounts. At the bottom bullet point is an adjustment of £40,000 for communities. In Appendix C of the previous report, the bottom line in that was the Community Improvement Fund of £4,000, not 40. Are these the same thing or are they different? Perhaps that's too. Perhaps you could come back to me offline about that.
We come back to you on that, Councillor Stewart. Thank you. We'll clarify.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else wishing to ask a question. Is that correct? If that is the case, I will invite Councillor Lyle to move the report, please.
Thank you again, Deputy Provost. Just over 6 months ago, this council set a balanced revenue budget for the current financial year. However, those 6 months seem like a lifetime away currently, and what has happened across the world has changed the world as we know it. This report provides elected members with an update on how COVID-19 may impact on our finances over the period 2021. Whilst the report makes difficult and sometimes grim reading, we could be in a much worse situation. Undoubtedly, things will change as the financial year progresses, as Mr. Mackenzie alluded to already this morning. In time, we will get more information on the full extent of the direct impact of COVID-19 on our expenditure and income as our recovery and renewal plans develop. And Perth Kinross offer will be further crafted throughout this year. We will understand from that point how we will have to change to support our communities and which council services we are going to have to further invest in. At this point, I would like to thank the Chief Executive and all her officers for their hard work in getting us to this position, and I look forward to receiving further updates throughout the course of this financial year in preparation for the next year's budget. Provost, I'm happy to move the paper. Deputy Provost, I'm happy to move the paper. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I invite Councillor Duff to second the report, please?
Thank you, Deputy Provost. This is a very helpful report which sets out the ups and downs of the revenue budget and the impact of COVID-19 on our finances this year in as clear a setting as is possible in the circumstances. As we already heard, there are a number of areas of income and expenditure which remain difficult to forecast. However, the mitigation measures outlined in this report will adjust the financial impact of COVID-19 on this council in this year's budget from somewhere between currently between 22 million and 27 million pounds down to a figure of between 1.7 and 6.1 million pounds. That said, we have heard that this is provisional and will change. We cannot allow ourselves to think that the worst is over. Members must be in no doubt that the second wave of coronavirus is here now and is already having further increasing impacts on our resources in both staff and finances. If I may, Deputy Provost, I would like to take this opportunity to gently remind everyone that our dedicated and hard-working officers and staff have been working flat out for well over 6 months now, many without the same levels of sleep, personal time and annual leave that they had expected to enjoy this year. In fact, the other day I suggested to the Head of Finance that we could probably plug the £6.1 million gap by cutting the council's budget for all the midnight oil which we've been burning these last few months. I would therefore implore all elected members to do whatever they can to reduce any unnecessary burdens on the officers and council staff in the weeks and months ahead. Returning to the revenue budget, Deputy Provost, the additional funds from both the UK and Scottish governments, as shown in the report, are very welcome, and we earnestly hope that further support from both governments will be forthcoming in the short, medium and long term. Deputy Provost, I'm happy to second the motion.
Thank you very much, and I'm very pleased that you acknowledge the hard work the staff are doing. I'm sure we all concur exactly with what you're saying. We know from the times that we get emails late at night that they are all going the extra mile every day. I now open it up for comment. At the moment, I don't see any comments in the chat box. I will wait a second or two.
There's an amendment from Councillor Stewart.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Stewart, I just see it now. Councillor Stewart, you have an amendment.
Well, thanks, Deputy Provost. I would prefer, to be honest, I would prefer not to actually bring an amendment formally, but I just wondered whether the leader of the council might consider incorporating something in his motion. One of the underspends that we're intending to apply to the general overspend on COVID is £300,000 for vehicle activated signs. I note that obviously over the summer we've been the beneficiary of more than £1 million worth of support from Sustrans for Spaces for People programme, including 20-mile-an-hour limits, and that indeed over the lockdown period speeding reports have increased generally across the council area. So my suggestion would be that if we accepted, it would be to accept the proposed utilisation of a projected net underspend of £3.863 million, with the exception of £300,000 in relation to the allocation for vehicle activated signs. Our communities, wherever the vehicle activated signs are put in, are very appreciative of them. I'd be concerned that this funding would be lost and that we would be losing the opportunity to build upon the great work that's been done by officers in rolling out 20-mile-an-hour limits across the area by not applying the vehicle activated sign allocation to its designated usage, but just to the general overspend.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Stewart. I think Barbara Renton may wish to make a contribution to that before I respond.
Sorry, my microphone was muted. Yes, Barbara Renton would like to speak.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Provost. Last year the Council approved a one-off £300,000 for road safety measures within the revenue budget for 2021. And there's also £300,000 in the capital budget also for vehicle activated signs, with approximately £182,000 left of that to spend this year. The reason why officers have put this up as a potential mitigation is that currently we don't have the staff resources to identify the sites and consult with communities and then procure and install the signs before March 2021. Normally that sum of money would buy us approximately 100 normal vehicle activated signs, and we could buy them to use up some of the budget, but then we would have a problem with where to store them as well. And we can't use Tayside contracts, which we've done in the past, as their stores are currently full as well. The signs come from a company and they come from abroad, so there can often be a 3-month lead-in time for manufacture. And that's, sort of was the reason why we put that up as a potential mitigation against the costs. So I think really then it's, sort of for elected members to decide on priorities.
No, thank you very much. I think I'm happy to accept Councillor Stewart's comments and to note them as part of the motion. And I'm sure I would ask Councillor Duff if he would be similarly minded. I think it's a reasonable suggestion. I'm happy to incorporate it.
Happy to accept as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lyle and Councillor Duff.
Thank you very much. Are there any more comments on this report? I don't see anyone else wishing to comment. I'll give you a minute or two. No, okay. So with that, with this extra amendment incorporated, we are happy to agree this report.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
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 Agreed. At this point on the agenda, we have a break. So I'm going to suggest we have a 10-minute break and we can start again at 11 o'clock. Hope members are happy with that suggestion.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Just time for a quick coffee, Kathleen.
Yes. Is everybody back?
Yes. I think so. Audrey will know where everybody is.
All present and correct.
Okay, councillors, it is now 11 o'clock because I do hear someone's clock chiming, so not everyone is in mute, so it must be 11 o'clock. We will now move on to paper 5, the investment blueprint and capital budget 2021 to 2028-2029 update. So I will invite Chief Executive to introduce the report.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Councillors, the capital programme is intrinsically linked to the Perth Kinross offer, which co-creates and designs public services for the future that meet the needs and aspirations of people and our local communities. The capital programme is also fundamental and a defining aspect of our plans to support recovery and renewal across the Perth and Kinross area as we all live with the impact of COVID. The paper before you today sets out firstly requests for council decision on progressing the development of an ambitious and aspirational investment blueprint that will shape the future of Perth and Kinross for generations to come. Secondly, the paper specifically requests council decisions on 5 key strategic projects that form the basis of the blueprint. These include the Cross Tay Link Road, City Hall, Perth High School, North Muirton and Bahousie Primary School and Blairgowrie Recreation Centre. And councillors, as you know, a number of briefings have been held to set out in depth the details of each of these projects. Councillors, these projects are an opportunity for the council to set its investment plans for Perth and Kinross, bringing significant opportunities for positive economic impact to the local area, supporting our business community as well as attracting inward investment. They enhance our local infrastructure to ensure better accessibility and connectivity while opening up housing and development land. They create positive learning environments for our children and indeed for generations to come. And they enable people in our community and indeed visitors to the local area to enjoy high quality cultural and health and wellbeing activities. All of these projects continue to build on Perth and Kinross's reputation as an area to live life well. I will now ask Stuart Mackenzie to speak to Appendix 1 and we shall thereafter move to decisions on each project. Thank you, Deputy Provost.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Councillors, if I can reference section 4 of the report in the context of Appendix 1. So section 4 of the report essentially seeks to set out the total resources which are contained within the approved 9-year capital programme. And gross those amount to £671 million over 9 years. 2020, capital budget 1920 to 2028-29. Apologies, 9 years 2021 to 28-29. So £671 million gross. £74 million of that is for a housing improvement programme, investment programme, and £597 million of that is for the general fund, or as we reference it, the composite programme. So that's the resource envelope, and that is reflected in our budget assumptions going forward. The report then focuses on how that resource is allocated between projects and programmes, and also comments on the fact that an awful lot of that expenditure, as it is currently profiled, is front-weighted. So the vast bulk of the expenditure, if approved by elected members, would be in the first 5 years of that programme. If I can turn very briefly to section 4.4 and onwards, which touches upon the update of the capital budget. In a similar manner to that which has just been discussed in the previous paper, there are a number of adjustments to the capital budget which require to be reflected coming out of the final accounts. So we have the carry forward of approximately £3.9 million of resources from the previous financial year into current and future financial years, and some adjustments to expenditure within the programme as set out in 4.6 and 4.7 of the report. And we also have received additional Scottish Government grant funding of £614,000 to address digital exclusion for our most disadvantaged young people, and an additional Forestry Commission grant of £385,000 for strategic timber routes, and £40,000 of funding through the Scottish Forestry Walking in and About Town programme. And all of these adjustments are reflected in Appendix 1 to the report, which would then form, if approved, would then form the starting point for our ongoing capital monitoring throughout the course of this year. So I'm happy to take questions on any of the detail. Deputy Provost.
Thank you very much, Chief Executive and Stuart Mackenzie. I now invite members for questions. Any questions on this report? Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Deputy Provost. It was a general question about the investment blueprint. I think normally now we're borrowing over a 50-year period for capital projects, and I just wondered whether it would be appropriate for the investment blueprint, as officers develop it over the next over the coming months, to say that we would not be we wouldn't seek capital borrowing for a term which outlasts the lifetime of the project to the council. So, for example, I mean, we'll come on to discuss the individual projects, but one of the projects Blair Rec it's suggested for a 40-year lifespan, and we, you know, if we borrow for 50 years for a 40-year project, we would then be paying for 10 years after the project life has expired. I just wondered whether that's something that might be considered for the investment blueprint.
Deputy Provost, if I may, yes, Councillor Stewart, we can certainly look at that. It would be an inappropriate use of funding if we were borrowing for extensive periods of time after the useful life of an asset. So I'm sure the Section 95 officer would take a dim view on that if we were to go down that route.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Yes, I would concur with that, Councillor Stewart. If I can provide some reassurance, that's actually what we're doing, as we are reflecting the useful life of the asset in our borrowing strategy.
Great, thank you very much for the answer.
Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I'm on page 83 of the report under the section Learning Estate Investment Programme. This may be just my lack of knowledge, but I noticed on the Perth High School, North Muirton and Balhousie Primary School, there's an opportunity to apply for 50% funding equivalent to 50% of the capital cost. And I just wonder why that wouldn't apply to the Blairgowrie Recreation Centre, since that is primarily a school facility. As I said, maybe just my lack of knowledge, so forgive me if that is the case.
Councillor Braun, I don't know if colleagues wish to comment further, but if I can maybe perhaps provide a little bit of background, the funding which is referenced within this section of the report is revenue funding. So the funding model from the Scottish Futures Trust is that local authorities would meet the upfront construction costs of a project. If funding was then approved by the Scottish Futures Trust and the Scottish Government, councils would receive equivalent revenue funding equivalent to 50% of the upfront construction costs over a 25-year period to support maintaining the condition of the building. The focus of that funding is predominantly on the the school estate and the Blairgowrie Recreation project, and this is not a comment on the merits or demerits of the project, is largely focused on the sports facilities associated with the school and with the community. So the officer assessment is that might be less likely to attract funding, but I don't know if my colleague Greg Bowen or Stephen Crawford is on the call, and you can perhaps...
Greg is ready to speak, to answer. Greg?
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Yes, Councillor Braun, if you take, for example, one of the criteria is about improving the condition of pupils. So if Perth High has, say, approximately 1,500 pupils, one of the key criteria is that the condition and suitability would improve. So if we replace Perth High, it will go from a C and a C to an A and an A. If you take the Blairgowrie Recreational Centre, which is part of the Blairgowrie High School, you would need to look to replace the high school as well as the recreational centre, which is also the PE department, to attract funding to the SFT. Hopefully that makes it a bit clearer.
Thank you very much. Sorry, just my lack of knowledge there, but thank you very much for clarifying. Cheers.
Thank you. Councillor Barnacle.
Thanks, Deputy Provost. I've actually got two questions, but one may be obvious. Just on the existing capital programme, I note the flood prevention schemes in there. I have some flooding issues in the west of Kinross Shire, which at the moment don't have a flood prevention scheme or a management scheme anyway to deal with. So I'm wondering what possibilities there might be for adjustments to this capital programme going forward if one identifies a need that's not currently assessed, if you see what I mean. It may well be that we can find a solution, but it may well require further additional investment that's not quantified at the moment. So my first question is, what opportunities might there be to refine this capital programme in the light of subsequent information?
Barbara Renton, you answer this, please.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Provost. Councillor Barnacle, as you're aware, then, you know, sort of the flood schemes that are currently within the capital programme are based on a national studies, and you know there is a long list of projects and flood alleviation schemes that are already within the budget, both within the council and across the country. We are currently looking at a refresh of that. That's being led obviously by, you know, sort of colleagues within the Scottish Government and SEPA, and we will be putting forward all of the information, all of the, you know, sort of in terms of most recent flooding, and then that will be analysed against a list across the whole of the country. That's the way that the scheme has always worked. We have taken regular reports previously to Environment Committee and now to Environment and Infrastructure, so that the team will be taking the information that we've got from areas which have regularly flooded, such as Alyth and now Kinross. There is some money for some scheme, a small scheme in Milnathort, I believe, already within the capital programme and in the national list. But there is a refresh of all of that, and the team are working towards submitting more information to assist that national project.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, there is a second subsidiary question. Am I allowed to ask that?
Yes, you may.
Well, the report identifies the funding gap on the 5 projects that we're going to be discussing, and obviously I'm just sort of, it's really about procedure, I suppose. Should we wish to pause any of these projects for any period for whatever reason in the subsequent debate, presumably before we make that decision, officers would clarify what the cost of that might be, because I think that would be important in any decision. So I'm just seeking clarity on that. Maybe that's already been made and I've missed it, but if I have, I'm sorry about that.
Deputy Provost, if I may respond, please. Councillor Barnacle, officers will do their best to quantify the impact of any decision to pause, but I'm sure you will understand that factors such as construction inflation are out with our gift, and we would be projecting what the impact of construction inflation or indeed deflation may be on the cost of any particular project, but we will certainly try our best to assist. Thank you, Deputy Provost.
Thank you. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. My question is actually on governance around the Gateway review process on page 77. I'm wondering if the Gateway review process has been fully defined and if we're using it currently for major projects and capital programmes.
Who's going to answer that question?
I'll respond, Deputy Provost, and if Stephen Crawford is available, he may well wish to add to what I'm about to say. So, Councillor McCall, we are using a version of the Green Book approach to Gateway review, which is one used by the Treasury for all major projects, and you may be aware that some of our projects have indeed had to go through that Gateway review process using the Green Book in the Tay-City deal funding. So we're using a version of that, scaled down and proportionate to the work of Perth Kinross Council. But Norman or Stephen may wish to add to what I've said. Thank you, Deputy Provost.
I think Norman, are you there?
Yes, Deputy Provost, thank you. Yeah, just to reiterate what the Chief Executive said, the Gateway review process is based upon the Treasury Green Book, and we are currently developing it more fully. The bigger projects, which particularly the ones going through Tay-City's deal, have been subject to the Gateway review as part of that. But in terms of the overarching programme and the Gateway review for that, we are in the process of developing that.
Can I ask a supplementary, Deputy Provost?
Yes.
Thank you, Chief Executive and Norman, for your response. I understand that part of our new way of working will be a more agile way of working, and the paper indicates that major issues will come before SPNR, but in past experience, very often these major issues, particularly in significant projects, are very often at a point where elected members have very little choice but to go with the recommendations because of timing and various other things. So I'm wondering what provision is being considered as part of the development of the Gateway review process to ensure that there is timely and agile oversight from elected members where it's appropriate in major projects and the governance of major projects and programmes.
So, Councillor McCall, I think what you're describing to me is the need for much more exception-based reporting linking into strategic risk and project risk. So I am happy to commit that we will look at how we ensure that where there is project risk, significant project risk, that would impact either on resources or other matters, that we bring that forward to the appropriate committee in a timely fashion.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing that.
Thank you. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I'm referring to page 93 in the report. Education Children's Services project nature of expenditure. As you may be aware, Braco and Green Learning School were combined and currently exist within the Braco Primary School, which is a composite of the school and the schoolhouse at one time. The state of the building is such that it either requires complete renewal or severe modification, and I see no mention in the list in page 93. Could someone please give me an idea of exactly where the plan for Braco and Learning School lies at the moment? Thank you.
Greg, do you wish to answer this, please? Sheila Devlin.
Yes, sorry, Deputy Provost. Yes, Councillor Gray, the Braco School project with the closure of Green Lawn Primary School is currently, we've had design back on the school, and we're currently considering a comparison against potentially a replacement due to the kind of the cost of going into the old building. We communicated recently with the Parent Council to update them on that position. We're currently waiting on getting the two options to finalise and then to be able to make a recommendation on the investment in the Brickell Primary School project.
Can I ask when might this, which years might this come to fruition?
We're actively pursuing and working with our property colleagues. I don't know if Steve wants to comment regarding resourcing. That's obviously been an issue because just now the priority has been obviously on the COVID response. But we will be engaging, I would suggest, later the year, start of next calendar year, about the final recommendation for moving the project forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions on this report? No, I don't see any questions. So now we are ready to consider individual parts of the reports. So I will invite Councillor Lyle to move sections 1 to 3 and Appendix 1, please. Councillor Lyle.
Okay, thank you very much, Deputy Provost. In March this year, the Council agreed a number of recommendations in relation to the Council's approach to capital investment, with a view to the development of a medium to long-term blueprint to help shape our decision-making, to make sure that we are spending money wisely on things that the people of Perth and Kinross need, want and value. Since then, the Council, like the rest of the country, has had to prioritise protecting health and well-being of our communities as we battle the COVID-19 pandemic. Because of this, officers have been unable to progress the work on the future investment blueprint. Our experience of the pandemic and the work that we are doing as part of our recovery and renewal has, however, brought us closer to our communities and has given us a much greater insight into their needs, and this will undoubtedly help us to prioritise where investment should be made in the future. This experience has reinforced the need for us to progress with the Perth and Kinross offer, which will help us to design and deliver the services and the infrastructure needed to make life that bit better for the people that we serve. The investment blueprint will reset the Council's strategy and key investment objectives for the medium to long term and will, in due course, replace the 10-year rolling capital programme, which we are currently operating. Given the nature of capital investment, however, there are a number of projects which are currently part of the capital programme that need a decision now, today, on the basis of risk associated either with the stage of the project or the impact that further delay or uncertainty may have. We are not being asked today to agree a new capital programme, but we are being asked to give clarity and direction in relation to 5 key projects stated within the report. All members have had various presentations in relation to these projects. In particular, we have had extensive information briefings and ward briefings in relation to the significant project on the list, the Cross Tay Link Road. We also have a great deal of detail in the project reports attached, and I am grateful to the officers for their advice and information that they have provided all of us to date. I also appreciate that from a financial monitoring perspective, the current capital budget, which, not introducing any new projects at this stage, does require to be adjusted. This to reflect our best assessment of the budget position in this current challenging climate. With that in mind, I therefore first of all would like to move that the Council 1. Notes the content of the report and the appendices. 2. Notes that whilst the project costs are continually being monitored, the full impact of COVID-19 at this date is not yet known. And 3. Approve the updated capital budget 2021 to 2029 as detailed in Appendix 1. Happy to move the paper. Thank you, Deputy Provost.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lyle. Can I invite Councillor Duff to second the report, please?
Thank you, Deputy Provost. The proposed investment blueprint remains a key strand in this Council's identification of its medium to long-term investment priorities. The blueprint will help to build confidence for residents, investors, partners, employers and developers. Among other things, it will help to direct how we encompass the needs of our communities, incorporate inclusive economic growth and meet our climate change promises. In a little while, we will give consideration to a small number of key capital projects. However, recent circumstances have impacted on the delivery of the capital programme agreed earlier this year and necessitated the interim update before us today. Deputy Provost, I'm happy to second the motion.
Thank you very much, Councillor Duff. Now, can I ask members if there are any amendments or comments on this section of the report? I don't see any comments or anything in the chat box, but I'll just wait a minute or two in case it's slow to come. No? So I take it we're all happy with the motion and as it is.
Agreed.
Agreed.
So we're agreed. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Now we move on to Appendix 2, which is the Cross Tay Link Road. So I can ask Councillor Lyle to move this part of the report, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Provost. The Cross Tay Link Road is much more than a new bridge. It is the key to unlocking land for the future development in and around the city of Perth. The delivery of the Cross Tay Link Road will remove the biggest constraint we have in and around Perth by releasing extra capacity in our transport network and our future land development. The Cross Tay Link Road will allow this council to fulfil its ambition to become a vibrant small city which is open for business. The Cross Tay Link Road is an integral part of our previous two local development plans and also the Perth Transport Futures. These plans lay out the future strategic direction for Perth and Kinross, giving us the framework for economic growth, regeneration and sustainable development. The Cross Tay Link Road will allow Perth and Kinross Council to address the significant air quality and congestion issues in the city of Perth by providing a long-term viable solution. Furthermore, the Cross Tay Link Road will open up important links between Blairgowrie and Eastern Perthshire and the Central Belt and will significantly reduce journey times.
Councillor Lyle, excuse me, Councillor Bailey's got a point of order, so perhaps it's maybe best if we just deal with that. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine.
Oh, thank you, Deputy Provost, and apologies, Councillor Lyle. I hadn't intended to interrupt your speaking and your contribution there. It's just actually my understanding had been that we would take questions on each of these appendices separately. However, we seem to have proceeded to moving the reports. Was I incorrect in that?
Councillor Bailey, I did ask if there was any questions, I think. We asked for questions after Chief Executive introduced it and there were no questions at that point. Or none from you.
I may have misheard, so I'll let someone else comment on that.
I think before we hear the motions and any potential amendments or any other thing, I think Councillor Bailey's point of order is worth proceeding with. And if we have questions on it, I think it's appropriate that any questions should be heard prior to the motion and the amendment. And thereafter, we restrict ourselves to comments. I'm happy to give that advice if the Deputy Provost is happy to proceed.
I'm happy to proceed if that is it in order in that way. I think we're getting advice from Lisa. Just bear with me.
Deputy Provost, if I can just clarify, yes, the procedural note did set out that we were taking questions on all aspects of the report at the beginning after the introduction from the Chief Executive. However, if you yourself and other members do wish to take individual questions at the beginning of each of the motions, that would be appropriate if you wish to do that.
Okay.
We've lost.
It's really the Provost who makes this call. I'm only chairing this part. The Provost is still in charge.
I'm happy to ask for a 5-minute recess until we clarify the issue. Deputy Provost.
Right. Okay then. Thank you.
I think I'm concerned that we're having to do this, but
Provost, if I may, I think it may be helpful to ask the Head of Legal and Governance and our Monitoring Officer for her advice to you, please.
yeah, I would agree. Thank you.
Yeah, I think what's happened is that when we've given the advice, when we've read out the procedural note, it's not been clear to elected members who were perhaps hearing it, as opposed, you know, that they were supposed to ask all of their questions at the outset. If everyone in the chamber is agreed, then we can take a pragmatic decision to proceed on that basis. And what I would propose that in terms of each paper, before the motion has actually been discussed and put forward, that we take an opportunity to ask questions. Once questions are finished on that particular topic, then we would ask the Leader of the Administration to move his respect of each of the projects. We will then take any amendments, notification of any amendments. We'll have our debate and then we'll vote amendments against the motion in the usual fashion. Provost, because you are the convener, and all points of procedure are technically yours, albeit that the Deputy Provost is managing the business at this stage. If you're happy to propose that and we get consensus in the chamber, then there isn't any technical difficulty in terms of competence, etc. It would appear to reflect what the chamber wants, and so therefore it's a pragmatic solution to make that work and to ensure that there is open and transparent discussion. I think there has just been a misunderstanding at the outset of the meeting, which is unfortunate, but this is a way of remedying that.
And Provost, if I may add, please, there will be no introduction from officers to each of the additional appendices.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. I'll take your advice. I'm quite happy to leave it to the councillors. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. So we're now at the Crosstay Link Road. Are there any questions from members? Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, and apologies for my confusion, Chamber. My question is around the Crosstay Link Road specifically. What specific alternative schemes were considered in the past as alternative ways of addressing the air quality issues in Perth besides the CTLR? Thank you.
So,
Deputy Provost, I think Peter Marshall can comment, and I can contribute if required.
Okay, Peter.
Yes, Deputy Provost. If I can clarify that this process started almost 20 years ago into investigations of what were the potential solutions, and through a process called Strategic Transport Appraisal Guidance, we held a workshop with Transport Scotland support to examine a vast range. From memory, it was about 20 different what they call interventions, in other words, projects which could help address the problem. It was found that none of the individual solutions produced the desired effect of relieving congestion and opening up the economic potential of Perth and Kinross, and of course the air quality issues. A number of the measures were what you would call traffic measures or minor junction improvements within the town centre, and they in themselves didn't produce the desired results. It came down to the options of looking for a new connection across the Tay. This was subsequently refined, and the first stage of looking at a new connection across the Tay looked at another bridge next to the Old Perth Bridge, the Smeaton Bridge, just to the north of it, which would have gone through the North Inch area. There was the gap between the grammar school and North Muirton was looked at as another potential location, as was a junction off the Inverraman Junction. All of these measures were shown not to work. The Inverraman Junction issue was that it was impossible to construct it without wide-scale demolition of what is valuable economic development land and jobs. The inner options were discounted because it didn't relieve the congestion problems from the Dunkeld Road. So we were left with options looking to the north of Perth. And again, 3 options were looked at that. And the preferred one is the one which you see before you now. I hope that clarifies the situation.
Can I have a supplementary, please?
Yes, you do.
Thank you for the response, Mr. Marshall. My question was, though, very specific towards what specific alternatives were considered for the air quality issues, because as I understand it, the council has a statutory duty to address the air quality problem, but doesn't have the same level of statutory duty towards tackling congestion and economic development, although I would agree that those are high priorities. So were there any other alternative schemes assessed specifically for their ability to tackle the air quality problems that are referenced in the report today?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that all of the issues are interlinked. Between congestion is the cause really, as well as traffic volume of the air pollution issue. So there is an interrelationship between them, but what was found that none of the measures that were looked at, including the promotion, greater promotion of public transport and active travel, measures to prevent traffic coming into Perth were looked at, and they were all found to be unworkable. One of the consequences of preventing traffic crossing the Perth area is it creates problems for particularly the east bank of the Tay and the Blairgowrie corridor in terms of accessibility for not just the general public but businesses. So there were a variety of options looked at there. They were all looking at air quality as well as the other issues. And what I should say is we do have certain statutory duties with regard to the promotion of both economic development and housing based on our legal requirement to follow not just the national planning framework, but the regional strategic development plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Barbara Renton would like to come in at the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Elected members will be aware that there is an air quality action plan for Perth, particularly the streets round about the Queen's Bridge. And sort of ongoing monitoring of all of the air quality continues as part of that. So the team that are responsible for that have looked at a number of mitigation measures in response to queries from community councils and from elected members themselves. And the main point of the findings there continues to come back to the best solution going forward for air quality within Perth is the building of the Cross Tay Link Road. As part of that, you know, sort of the monitoring that they've been doing across the last 6 months has demonstrated that the best improvement that we have seen for years in the air quality within those streets has been during lockdown, purely because there have been much fewer vehicles on the road.
Thank you. David Littlejohn, you'd like to comment?
Thanks, Deputy Provost. It's just really to add to what Barbara had said. The estimates that we had, that 80% of the nitrogen oxides within the air quality management area originate from road vehicles, and the action plan that Barbara referred to indicated that the concentrations would need to reduce by around 1/3 to meet our objectives, and that would largely be delivered through the Cross-Tay Link Road. But not only that, the other mitigation measures that Peter referred to are also important. So it's not an either or, it's a both. And the Perth Transport Futures project has a phase 4, which includes all of those wider measures in and around the city centre that will contribute to those to the achievement of the targets. But given the scale of the challenge, it's very difficult to see going forward sustainably to sustain gains made over the years. It's impossible to see how that gain will continue without the Cross-Tay Link Road. The other measures are simply not going to do it for us on their own.
Thank you. Councillor Sarwar.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, it was my button wasn't changing. Yeah, can I also offer my thanks to the officers for coming to ward meetings? Unfortunately, I had to leave before my question was answered and I haven't had any follow-up from it, so I'll ask it again. What could potential mitigating measures look like for the increase of traffic that we expect on the A94 going north? And are these measures dependent on any budgetary pressures?
Thank you.
I think invite Peter Marshall to respond to that question, if I may.
Yes, sorry, I think as far as I'm aware, a response was issued yesterday, and I apologise if you've not got that, but I will read what was provided. At this stage, it's too early to speculate what mitigation measures may be required for any road that may be affected by virtue of the CTLR. However, for protection to communities along these routes, protection communities that may see some impact, a detailed monitoring and evaluation strategy for the Cross-Tay Link Road and the connecting roads shall be submitted to the Council as Planning Authority in consultation with Transport Scotland. And I should say this is a fairly normal process with any major roads project. The scope of the plan will be agreed in advance, including the location and duration of traffic counters proposed as part of the monitoring and agreed timescales for sharing results and the arrangements for sharing results. This will work for a minimum of 6 months post completion of the road and the opening of the road. The results may include recommendations to mitigate any impacts identified, and should be noted that the predicted 12% increase over the course of the day compared with current flow levels is well within the capacity of the existing road. I should say that's referring to the A94, which I think was your initial inquiry. I think in terms of the budgetary impact, this report and the requirement to take action on the report, the findings of the report will be a condition within the planning consent if it is approved in its current draft form, I should say. So there would be a commitment from the council as part of the project to implementing the proposals that came forward. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Deputy Provost. I mean, The question I wanted to ask, I'm grateful to Councillor Sawa for her question there, because it's one that I know concerns a lot of communities up the A94, regardless of the capacity of the road. It's the capacity of the communities to take that extra traffic that's a concern. But specifically, my question is about the COVID-19 impact on traffic. There are 3 paragraphs in the report, 4, 15, 16 and 17, about this. I think my question, however, is the wider impact of COVID on working patterns and how some of the benefits of, I don't want to say the benefits of COVID-19, I mean the benefits of a changed working pattern necessitated by COVID-19 might be embedded, rather than going forward with assumptions which are, you know, based on, I think Mr. Marshall said this was started 20 years ago, although I know that a third crossing has been spoken about before. Is there an opportunity here that we are potentially missing to embed the working patterns, working at home, staggered starts, for the communities in Eastern Perthshire who would be using coming down the A94, A93, using the Cross-Tay Link Road? Is there an opportunity that we're missing here to embed that and miss the opportunity that would alleviate congestion in the city centre? I'm just wondering how widely that's been looked at by officers in terms of preparing this report.
I invite Peter Marshall to answer that question, please. Peter.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I think, in short, there is always going to be an extent to which we will say we're not quite sure what the future will look like, and I think we have to acknowledge that. However, the indications are at present that traffic volumes have returned quite quickly, and most recently about 80% of the previous flows have been experienced, and that is despite the fact that vast numbers of people who normally worked in Perth town centre are working from home, and council staff amongst them. What has been seen in other cities as well around the world is that some of the traffic levels on return to sort of post-lockdown have exceeded pre-lockdown levels, and this is because of the shift away from using public transport to using individual cars, and also avoiding lift sharing, which had been one of the measures we've been promoting in the past. I think we also have to bear in mind that a lot of the traffic that's travelling through Perth is going to schools, it is going to work in businesses and factories and other types of employment which are not so conducive to home working. So it's the office-based workers which I'm sure we will see an increase in home-based working for the office workers, but we are quite convinced that the change in working pattern will itself not solve the problems that we have at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and a second one, if that's allowed.
Okay.
Thanks. Thank you, Deputy Provost. It was the opening up of the land between the A85 and the A9, Perth West, Perth Park, etc. Is that possible with an A9 junction access from Bertha Park, but without doing the Cross-Tay Link Road? We were given a cost for that junction access onto the A9. Is it possible to do just the junction access to provide access to that residential and employment land without doing the cross to link road from the A9 to the A93 to the A94.
Okay. Peter.
Thank you. The issue is not about the possibility of putting in a junction, and I think Gillian Ferguson may wish to come in and confirm this. The cost of that junction alone is something in the region of 40 million, I believe. However, if you do not have the Cross Tay link road, you're not resolving the traffic problems in the centre of Perth. Sorry. Another phone ringing there, sorry, apologies for that. So if you don't resolve the problems in the centre of Perth and take the traffic out, and we can't resolve the air quality issues and the congestion issues in the centre of Perth, it is not sustainable to allow the growth of areas like Bertha Park to its full potential, or Ammon Valley and other development sites around Perth, because they will exacerbate the problems in the town centre without the Cross Tay link road. And that would be failing in our duties to deal with the air quality issues. So the key thing is that the Perth Transport Future projects and the Cross Tay link road is about relieving the problems in central Perth to open up the capacity in the wider Perth area. So in itself, that junction would, whilst it can be physically constructed separately, is not going to resolve the capacity issues and allow us to develop the strategy as proposed in the strategic and the local development plans. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barnacle.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Provost. In another life, when I was Environment Convener many years ago, we introduced the air pollution monitoring stations in various parts of the city, and I've always had concerns about the level of pollution in Perth, and always seen the Cross Tay link road as an answer to that, or certainly one way of alleviating it. However, I do have an issue with the link road in that it actually does cut through a development site in the local plan. So you're trading, to a certain extent, a cut in pollution in the city to increase pollution through a new development site, which I think is bad planning, and also the communities along the A94 with increased traffic, probably. So it is a bit of a trade-off. And the other thing is,
Councillor Barnacle, you've got a question here.
Yeah, well,
please.
Yeah, what I'm really saying is, why was that proposed, to take a major road through a new community in a local plan? That seems bad planning to me. Why was that done? And secondly, what has been done within Perth through signage and other measures to take particularly heavy goods vehicles round the city, rather than using some of the bridges to access Dunkeld Road, for example? Has there anything been done on that to improve that?
Thank you. Peter Barrett has a point of order here. Councillor Barrett, you have a point of order.
Deputy Provost, but Councillor Barnacle's points were all addressed during the planning application debate for the Cross Tay link road. We're not recycling those arguments today.
Thank you. I think your comments well noted.
I accept that point. Deputy Provost. That's fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Barbara Renton wishes to answer your questions, Councillor Barnacle. Barbara.
Thank you. I mean, my colleagues, David or Peter, probably want to come in with a little bit more detail in relation to signage and sort of other things round about Perth City, but it's just to confirm that there is a big difference between Perth City. We've always acknowledged that, particularly in some streets at Bridgend and Perth itself, that it's the canyoning effect of the buildings on either side of the roads that cause the significant amount of air quality issues. that wouldn't be the case, sort of as we discussed with the line, sort of when that was brought to council last year, that the planning, sort of would be very clear about not creating those similar conditions, sort of with the new builds and the new houses. But David and Peter may want to come back in with the specifics of Councillor Barnacle's question. Thank you, Deputy Provost.
Thank you.
But if I can come in on the signage, and I'm not an expert on the signage, but if I can say there are two types of measures that can be introduced. There are those which are determined by traffic orders, in other words, weight restrictions, and they need to be justified because as it stands, any traffic has the right to use a public road, and that is a more difficult area if you're wanting to ban certain traffic movements and certain classes of vehicles. The second is advisory signs, and this is something that can be looked at in conjunction with the Cross-Tay Link Road, as it opens up other opportunities to avoid the town centre. This can be addressed. I hope that sort of partly deals with the signage question.
Thank you. Councillor McDade.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Yes, my question is on page 117 around COVID-19 impact on traffic, and I want to understand a bit more about have we got significant modelling about different potential future traffic patterns based on a reduction in traffic into the city centre during working hours, based on a significant reduction in physical offices and other businesses in the city centre, because obviously we've seen during COVID-19 where a lot of people are working from home, but not everyone has been, but major employers are beginning to talk about moving to significant amount more working from home, and obviously retail is going to change dramatically, and we haven't really had the COVID recession yet properly, so the impact of that will be significant. So what I would like to know is, have we got significant modelling going forward that looks at that?
Okay, I'm not sure. Barbara maybe wishes to talk here. I think she's.
No, sorry. I think that Peter Marshall would come in, but his response
Sure.
I think is very similar to the one that's been made already. Thank you.
I think the short answer is we do not have modelling on that basis at the moment because there are too many unknowns. However, what I would say is that whilst we will see a reduction in the number of people working in the town centre, I'm quite certain of that in terms of home working. We have to remember that this is about, the model is about the whole of the Perth area, and it is unlikely to resolve the problems within the town centre. It may have a bigger impact on some of the more peripheral areas and junctions, but at the moment it is impossible to have enough reliable data to formally model it.
Thank you very much. Okay, I don't see any more questions. Can I now invite Councillor Dwyer to move this part of the report, please?
Thank you very much, and I hope members have been satisfied with the answers provided, and I would again like to thank the officers for bringing forward the paper. I'm going to rewind and I'm just going to begin my motion again, as I think it's some time since you heard it. The Cross-Tay Link Road is much more than a new bridge. It is the key to unlocking land for the future development in and around Perth. The delivery of the Cross-Tay Link Road will remove the biggest constraint we have in and around Perth by releasing extra capacity in our transport network. The Cross-Tay Link Road will allow this council to fulfil its ambition to become a vibrant small city which is open for business. The Cross-Tay Link Road is an integral part of the two previous local development plans and also the Transport Futures, Perth Transport Futures. These plans lay out the future strategic direction of Perth and Kinross, giving us a framework for economic growth, regeneration and sustainable development. The Crosstay Link Road will allow Perth and Kinross Council to address significant air quality and congestion issues in Perth by providing a long-term viable solution. Furthermore, the Crosstay Link Road will open up important links between Blairgowrie, Eastern Perthshire and the Central Belt by significantly reducing journey times. Furthermore, the Scottish Government has allocated £40 million of grant funding in support of this important project. If we do not proceed today, the money may well be lost to Perth and Kinross and expose us to significant risk from developers and others who may have already contributed to this project. I cannot emphasise enough my belief that the delivery of the Crosstay Link Road is fundamental to Perth's future prosperity, and I urge you to support this motion. I therefore move 1. That the Council recognises the Crosstay Link Road is integral to the delivery of our local development plan and will be key to our economic recovery and growth. And 2. Agrees that the project should proceed as planned without further delay. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you very much. And I invite Councillor Duff to second, please.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Over these last few months, we have continually heard about the effects of coronavirus on our local economy, with jobs going, redundancies looming, premises closing and investment declining. What we need is something that tells the world that Perth and Kinross is a great place to build your business, to live, to work, to bring up your family, to invest and to visit. The Crosstay Link Road will do this. As members can see, the list of benefits to Perth and Kinross that the Crosstay Link Road will bring is considerable. The removal of significant traffic congestion from Perth city centre and the reduction in air pollution levels, the opportunity to improve active travel and transport routes in and around the city, the release of nearly 300 acres of employment land, an estimate of nearly £1 billion of additional private sector investment, over 12,000 new homes, including over 3,000 affordable houses, with many homes in the help to buy category and many smaller houses to help people downsize. Nearly 3,000 person years of employment in the construction of the road and houses alone, at a time when we are currently experiencing a 151% increase in unemployment. A £40 million investment from the Scottish Government, over £10 million in additional council tax receipts, and an estimated £17 million in developer contributions, and nearly £500 million of construction gross value added. Deputy Provost, the Crosstay Link Road is good news for Perth and Kinross. The people of Perth and Kinross know this, the business community of Perth and Kinross know this, the Scottish Government know this, and I'm sure that the elected members of Perth and Kinross know this too. We need to send out a strong signal today that we welcome this investment in our infrastructure and that it should proceed without delay. Deputy Provost, I have much pleasure in seconding the motion.
Thank you very much, Councillor Duff. Can I ask if there are any comments or amendments? Councillor Bailey, you have an amendment.
Yes, I do have. Thank you, Deputy Provost. The Crosstay Link Road is a road into the unknown for Perth and Kinross. We now face a completely new reality compared with the models when models were created that gave us the £1 billion investment figure. Millions more people working from home, growing unemployment which is driving up the gap between the richest and poorest in our area, and a social care crisis are just 3 of the things that undoubtedly mean that the previously calculated upside of this road need to be rethought. There are so many new and different demands on this council's finances, and there's currently no way of knowing whether we can afford this road alongside addressing the very real challenges that we face in social care, our ageing school buildings and lack of affordable housing. This council needs time to take account of the new reality we all live in and to revisit the numbers to address these unknowns. The earliest that this can possibly happen is February 2021, once we know more about how much money we have. As we heard earlier in this meeting, there's not enough certainty at this point in time to set even indicative budgets over the normal 3-year term. Therefore, let's have a short pause on the CTLR until we know how much money is in the piggy bank. I'd therefore like to formally move the following amendment. I wonder if officers could put that on the screen. I see it's already present, thank you. So the amendment is to Report 5, Recommendation 4. This council notes the information provided regarding the potential impacts of the CTLR and recognises the potential it could have to drive significant growth for our region. However, in light of the lack of certainty regarding the council's external funding streams and the longer-term impacts of the current virus pandemic will have on our communities, requests that no further expenses incurred nor commitment given to external parties regarding the CTLR until after the council's 2021-22 capital budget has been agreed. Thank you, Deputy Provost.
Thank you very much. Do you have a seconder for your amendment?
Yep, I think so.
I'm happy to second that, Deputy Provost. I think it is important that at this time, as we're in the middle of a pandemic, that we take time to take stock essentially of what the future may look like, because I don't think any of us are actually certain of that. We hope there will be a vaccine, we hope there will be a cure potentially in the future, but we do not know that, and we don't know when life will return to normal as we used to know it, or indeed if it will. And indeed there are many companies around the world and across the country who are looking to move out of offices, to move to a much greater level of home working. That will have a huge impact on all of our town and city centres. It will impact on our retail offering. It will have massive changes for all of our communities, and we need to understand what those changes will look like and what impact that will have before we commit significant sums of council money to a project which actually may no longer be required, potentially, depending on the air quality issues in the city centre of Perth, and also depending on what the future economic spread looks like. I think that from my point of view, 78 million, which is the council's contribution to this, is a huge sum of money to commit essentially for the long term without actually having those answers to those questions. And as we've heard from officers earlier, we don't actually yet have even projections potentially of what that will look like. So I think we need to take this moment to pause for a few months to see what the impact could be, and hopefully by February we'll actually have more information. And I think that whilst the Cross-Tay Link Road was forward-looking when it was first discussed and initiated, and it has been a long-term project. It's been around for about 20 years, is my understanding, in different incarnations in terms of its discussion, and it's obviously been the last few years that the council has formally committed its significant resource and development to it. However, we are now also in an era of climate change, significant climate change, which has been acknowledged by our governments and around the world. And we need to consider what our impacts on the environment are going to be by building essentially a new trunk road. And I think that for me, this road is not transformational. What would be transformational would be to spend the same money on public transport improvements and active travel improvements that would unlock the potential. And just to put a bit of context on that, for a similar sum of money to what we're going to spend on the Cross-Tay Link Road, based on the recent Borders Railway project, we could build a railway between Perth and Blairgowrie, and that to me would be truly transformational, and it would be forward-looking, and it would actually allow us to unlock the potential of all of these communities along that route. However, I think the main point here is that we don't have all the answers at the moment, and we are about to commit to the largest project in Perth and Kinross history, and as far as I'm concerned, we should take very careful time to consider that before we commit that money for those of us who will end up as Perth and Kinross Council taxpayers repaying that over the next 50 years.
Thank you very much, Councillor McDade. Councillor Parrott.
Thank you very much, Deputy Provost. Can I first comment on Councillor McDade's comment about railway prices? It's not fair to compare the price of the Tweed Bank Railway with the railway to Blairgowrie, because the earthworks for the Tweed Bank Railway were already in place and were put in place in the 1860s and 1870s when it was built. So he's wrong there, I have to say. With regard to the Cross-Tay Link Road, I believe this project is as fundamental now as the Friarton Bridge project was back in the 1970s. It is not an end in itself, it's a means to an end. The ends are the other opportunities and benefits that it provides for us in a whole variety of ways. That said, I am not a natural supporter of road projects. I'm much keener on things like the freight siding at Blackford on the railway, the new electric coach services we're looking at, but this road project is vital and I urge members to support it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Sarwar.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I have had my doubts and my frustrations with this project. I feel we should have had more and earlier transparency with our communities, particularly relating to the traffic modelling and impact for communities north of the proposed route. I have previously pushed for a change of route to the road, but I recognise that today is not the time for this. Air pollution is currently at unacceptably high levels for the communities at Bridgend and around Athol Street. We all have a responsibility to these residents as well as our various local wards. I will be closely following the impact of this road on the A94 and will hold this council to its mitigation commitment. But there is potential for environmental benefits of this project, not only with the reduction in air pollution around the city limits, but with a designated cycle path along the length of the route and the potential for additional EV charge points and the electric fleet for buses and other cars. This road could be a tool for increasing greener travel options. Environmental policy options cannot exist in a bubble. They need to affect change with and for those directly impacted by the climate emergency. Thus, it is with reluctance I will be supporting the continued rollout of the Crosstay Link Road.
Thank you. Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I have to say I'm surprised at the number of questions on this matter, because none of us can ever suggest that we don't have enough information on which to base our decision. There's never been so many opportunities for us to engage with and ask questions of the officers on any decision we've taken in the past. And I want to thank all of the officers who've helped us with that. Specifically, I want to thank Alex Deans, Darryl McEwen and David Littlejohn for the time they've spent with me discussing the concerns of my constituents in Rate and Abernight and for agreeing to the mitigation measures in that area in advance of the CTRL. So, Deputy Provost, we came into this administration saying we would focus on economic development, especially in rural areas, and that's exactly what this project will do, at the same time helping to mitigate the well-known air quality issues in Perth. I mentioned specific ward concerns in Rate and Abernight, but one thing that concerns me just as much from my ward is housing allocation. We have a commitment to the Scottish Government to allocate land for a large number of houses, and these houses are currently all planned for the Perth West area and linked to the CTRL being built. Should we abandon this plan, then the requirement for that land still exists. We'll be obliged to provide it somewhere else. The Carsagowrie would most likely be where a large number of houses are built, and I for one could not look my constituents in the eye if I voted for something that resulted in thousands of houses around Errol, Longforgan and Instewr. I'd suggest to my colleagues who represent the Cars think carefully about this before they vote. Some members want us to pause this for a few months. Deputy Provost, we've paused this for 20 years. Please, let's stop kicking the can down the road. We're elected to make decisions, so let's just get on with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. The Crosstay Link Road is a key element of both the TAY Plan Strategic Development Plan and, after much planning, briefing and scrutiny by officers and members, the Perth Kinross Local Development Plan. These plans are both approved by the Scottish Government in line with national planning policy. This paper covers the many benefits of moving the CTLR forward and the risks should it be stalled. CTLR is key as it shall relieve the adverse effects of northeast-southwest traffic passing through Perth City from Broxden to Scone and shall unlock much employment and residential development land essential to the sustainability of Perth as a desirable city to live in, work in and visit. Fundamental to any city is that through traffic is diverted round rather than through its centre. Frankly, the CTLR project is an open wound waiting to be stitched and sealed with recovery to follow. Like a pothole in a road, a broken fence, a hole in a wall, a jar of jam without an airtight lid, any of such things which lead to unwelcome consequences. Nothing is less acceptable to the health of Perth than needless, often heavy traffic channelled over constricted bridges and funnelled along city centre streets. And it needs to be said that the effects of COVID creating working from home will not diminish heavy traffic moving goods up and down the country. New housing developments at Scone and elsewhere are and shall be adequately provided with walkways free of traffic dangers by the CTLR and indeed by the other elements of the Perth Transport Futures project. To conclude, I believe it would be extreme folly to inhibit progress of the Cross-Tay Link Road, and I commend this paper to the Council.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gray. Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. A decision today to support the Cross-Tay Link Road project is our recognition of the importance of Perth's future as a business and residential centre, and to give it the potential to be such. All of us have seen the figures put forward by officers, potentially over 5,000 new jobs, over £900 million of private sector investment. Every £1 invested by us can regenerate £4.50 in economic growth, and our commitment to much of our housing supply designated in LDP2 is dependent on this approval. Air quality has been much debated on this project, with concerns that the pollution experienced at Bridgend will simply move to Scone and the CTLR corridor. However, we are all aware that vehicles are changing. Completion of this project will take around 3 or 4 years, and by that time the change to hybrid and electric will be further advanced and still advancing. Government targets, changes by manufacturers and advancing technology, public desire to mitigate climate change and reducing costs will be the driving force for that change, and that will be ongoing as houses around the CTLR are being built. Whilst pollution from particulates will remain, even these can be reduced by the application of good, careful, regenerative braking. Every vehicle that changes to these new technologies will make a small but definite change to air quality. A project of this size will of course raise environmental concerns, and we all respect those, but we must find a balance with supporting the economic prosperity of Perth. Doing nothing could allow Perth to just stagnate. Unlike past road building, today we try to work with the environment. We plan to keep disturbance to a minimum. We plan around biodiversity, and we aim to keep carbon emissions as low as possible. The ultimate aim that when finished, nature will regain an equilibrium, and we've seen some of this when phase 1 was developed. Provost, completion of this project will alleviate the existing traffic problems that blight parts of Perth. In doing so, it will improve the lives of the people who live and work in and around the city. Of proposed new housing, if the CTLR were to be refused, potentially over 7,000 new homes would be lost, and of those 1,800 would have been allocated as affordable housing, much needed affordable housing, I might add. And it will open further options to remodel transportation within Perth, allowing decisions on more sustainable and better public transportation, such as making park and ride schemes quicker and more efficient to use, with electric buses, of course. Deputy Provost, I urge everyone to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Braun. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Deputy Provost. There are moments on Perth and Kinross's timeline which have enduring impacts on our city and wider area's economic prospects for decades. I'm thinking about the missed opportunity to achieve city status to mark the millennium in 2000, because the then city fathers and mothers thought that we were already a city, and it took until the Queen's Jubilee 17 years later, and who knows at what cost to inward investment to put that right. The other missed opportunity was Perth's failure to win the competition for Scotland's first university for 400 years in 1967, when Stirling was successful at our expense. So now is not the time to let another golden opportunity for growth in our area slip. Provost, I think that the decision today on whether to proceed with the CTLR is one that we need to support. If we're going to guarantee the next generation of Perth citizens homes to live in, businesses and commercial premises to work in and from, and to improve the present life expectancy and health of current Perth City residents afflicted by poor air quality, excessive NOx and particulate pollutants emanating from traffic congestion. Provost, as a member of the Perth City Centre ward whose residents in Main Street, Bridgend and Athol Street, Barrack Street corridors already experience and endure poor air quality and exceedances of pollutants in close proximity to 3 primary schools, I want to see rapid progress on the construction of the Cross-Tay Link Road and not constant scrutiny of the rear view mirror. I also want to see the CTLR through to completion so that we can grow our city with over 12,000 new houses which would otherwise have to be built elsewhere, realise 117 hectares of employment land and the almost 1 billion of private investment in our area. Provost, there's a table of benefits of the CTLR spanning 5 pages of this report. Equally, there are 5 pages of risks of no CTLR. But the benefits, even if some members want to ignore them, are outweighed massively by the risks on which their own are more than enough reasons not to abandon the project. The financial risk to £484 million of gross value added to Perth and Kinross economy and the loss of £40 million Transport Scotland funding and a further £17 million developer contributions cannot be countenanced. And neither can we countenance the reputational risk of breaching Scottish planning policy and the catastrophic loss of confidence that the construction industry and local businesses would undoubtedly experience if the council performs a volte-face on a key strategic project which has been 12 years in the design and making. The environmental risk of allowing poor air quality to persist and congestion to continue to plague residents in the city centre cannot be allowed. The economic risks to the loss of business land and the legal risk of laying ourselves open to suit for damages and the cost of judicial review, which we are told would have real prospects of success. Provost, this council needs cool heads and calm decision. I urge members to vote for the motion.
Thank you very much, Councillor Barrett. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I'll cut to the chase. I totally support this project and this paper. I don't think it's just about air quality management and congestion in Perth, although these are important matters. I think the paper sets out the position on air quality. On congestion, it seems to me there is no perfect solution, and that applies in particular to Inveramid and also to Broxden junctions. But in general, it certainly does seem that it cuts down journey times across the board. But it goes beyond just for citizens of Perth and those travelling into work in Perth from out with in other parts of Perth and Kinross. It's the broader issues. I think it's easy to focus on some of the negatives if we were to reject this in terms of legal costs. Effectively, we would be tearing up the local development plan. But I think the key thing is to actually focus on the positives. And I think that is set out in pages 114 to 115 of the report, the benefit cost ratio. And the figures really are quite startling. It's benefit cost ratio of 4.54 and it's under the Treasury and Department of Transport procedures. That comes out as very high. That's the top category. So even if you have some criticisms of it, the benefits for the next 20-25 years are immense, in my view, in terms of economic development. We just, I don't think in this can afford to dither and delay anymore. If you go back to 1995, the Perth Local Plan, I seem to recall that, in fact, it was even being discussed back in the 1960s. This has really gone on for such a long time. Councillor Barrett is right about missed opportunities. I can recall the debate about the university, and that was in the late 60s. But this is something we've got to seize, got to go forward with, and drive the future of Perth and Kinross. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Yes, made a few notes here. I'm not take you too long. 20 years and more, I would say this has been ongoing for, because I arrived here in 1970 and everyone was on about needing another bridge across the Tay up at the top. So yes, we have had an aspiration for the CTLR that will reduce the amount of heavy traffic travelling through Perth centre, causing pollution and congestion to Bridgend and Athol Street, which the canyoning effect in there
is greatly damaging to all our citizens that live in that area. So we need to push forward with that. We need to push forward. We also need to be pushed forward for the sake of the developments around the Perth boundaries. I attended a consultation many years ago representing the taxi trade, and in my view, the other options would impact on the amount of visitors and not encourage further development. I would say that we need to look seriously at infrastructure surrounding the CTLR and undertake changes to ensure that people living in these areas are not badly impacted by this project. Therefore, I support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Purvis.
Thanks. Oh, sorry, heard some noises there. Thank you, Deputy Provost. First, I'd just like to address the report. I know a number of points have been made about the opportunities we've had to question officers, and that has been very welcome. I would say, however, that I'm slightly disappointed by how the report has been constructed. I don't think it is conducive to balanced debate to have a list of the benefits of progressing with the CTLR, the risks of not progressing, but not to have a list of the benefits of not having the CTLR or the risks of progressing with the CTLR. I note that similar ways of reporting to committees were heavily criticised by the independent inquiry in relation to the IGB, and I think that point stands here. It's not good for decision making and open and transparent debate. So I would like to see that addressed going forward. Moving to the substantive issues, people have talked about the fact we've been speaking about this for 20 years, and just because we've been talking about something for 20 years doesn't mean that that's necessarily the right way forward. I think we would all agree that there is a need to address air pollution and the congestion within Perth in particular, but also in Scone. The issue here is that I think there are a number of other ways we could have looked to address those issues that would be significantly cheaper. There was money invested in the capital programme to trial this, but that has not been progressed. And if we look at particularly European cities, but also in South America and in other parts of the world, there are lots of opportunities like living walls and artificial trees that can significantly and have been proven to significantly reduce air pollution, and that would be a far cheaper cost than what we're doing at the minute. I also think that we need to consider, as Councillor Bailey has said when moving his amendment, the changes to working patterns and travelling patterns going forward. If we think about what over £100 million could do if we were to spend that on improving broadband to help people work from home more easily, or indeed to invest a significant portion of that in the air mitigation, air pollution measures that I have talked about. So I think there are other opportunities that have not been explored in sufficient detail. People have raised the issue about the unlocking of housing development. In terms of the build out rates of some of these land sites, it's very unlikely that that will be required, and the CTLR will be required until significantly further on in the current capital programme, while we are front loading this CTLR project. So I think that that risk to the council, certainly at the moment, and certainly with a pause, as Councillor Bailey has suggested in his amendment, is not a significant risk that the council faces. I also think that there is strong evidence that, and has been by a number of universities that have carried out studies on this, that when you build more roads, that doesn't mean that you necessarily have fewer journeys. Actually, in many cases, it can create additional traffic as a result of the road. So while you might be displacing some of the traffic, you might be also creating additional traffic too. I also think that in terms of the route, and others have raised that that was a decision that we took last year, but this is something that I think the council has really got wrong over the period that has been considering this. It seems that for a very long time, the Scone North development site was never overlaid with a plan of the Crosstail Link Road, which seems to me ludicrous that that was never demonstrated to the council at the time. As Councillor Barnacle has alluded to in one of his questions, people on in wards with main arterial routes going through villages and hamlets routinely get concerns about the need for traffic mitigation. It isn't all about air pollution. There are concerns about road safety, about vibrations in people's homes because of the condition of the roads. So that does create significant problems, and I think to knowingly build a main arterial route through a development of this scale is the wrong decision. But I also think some of the arguments that have been made in relation to that and air quality have been somewhat contradictory. We've heard already today about the fact that it isn't much of a problem in terms of air pollution, that the road will be going through the new Scone North development, because within a few years cars will either be hybrid or fully electric. If that's the case, then surely the same thing applies within Perth, and the air pollution issues in Perth will be mitigated too. So while people are entirely entitled to make arguments of that nature, I don't think they can make the same argument to contradict themselves in two different cases. And I don't think that is helpful as part of this debate. So I think in summary, I will be supporting Councillor Bailey's amendment to pause the Crosstail Link Road. I don't think this is a good use of public money, and I think that there are significantly better ways that we could look at to address some of the serious issues which we all accept about air pollution in Perth and in other areas. Thank you, Deputy Provost.
Thank you very much, Councillor Purvis. But I need to remind members that we do not wish them to speak more than 5 minutes with their comments. Thank you very much. Councillor Jarvis.
Oh, come on.
Anne, you're still muted. Councillor Jarvis, you're still muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
I'm sorry, I've been having dreadful problems all morning, getting chucked out the meetings, etc., etc. Anyway, you know, this is not a time for kind of small-minded thinking. The A9 at the moment is a strategic route, and to try to postpone the CTLR for green reasons is just ignoring the fact how important this whole road is. But to actually deal with the problems in Perth itself, I mean, not too long ago, I missed a very important awards ceremony just by the sheer volume of traffic trying to get into Perth. We want to bring tourists in, we want to increase our own employment, and in the current situation, we just cannot do that. We need to go ahead with this. We are playing our part, but at the moment, a lot of the smaller villages in and around Perth are suffering some pretty heavy vehicles going through at all hours of the night and day and disturbing the quality of life there. So, you know, I'm fully behind this, but I think it is now time. Our officers are doing their best, but it is time they hardballed and went to Bear Scotland, Transport Scotland and the Scottish Government and told them to get their finger out and sort out the problems at Inverarmond and Broad, because the new CTLR road will not be fully effective until these two problems are sorted out. So, we need the bigger picture looking at, and it's down to the three organisations that I have just mentioned to sort out their side of the problem, because we are sorting out our side of the problem, and I am fully behind going ahead with the CTLR because it will relieve some of the problems in and around Perth. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I cannot support this motion, but I do have some sympathy for the amendment proposed by Councillor Bailey and McDade, but it does not go far enough. Colleagues will be aware of my long-standing opposition to Crosstail Link Road for over 17 years as a councillor and before that. I am not a lone voice, as increasing numbers of Perth Kinross residents now agree with me. Indeed, I understand 72% want the Crosstail Link Road abandoned, according to a recent Perthshire Advertiser poll. There is not and never has been a public campaign in favour, only interventions from interested parties. Evidence from around the world indicate that these millions could be better spent on proven green and active travel initiatives. I am particularly unhappy that the changes in circumstances, not just the grim uncertainty of COVID-19, have been totally disregarded. I want us to abandon the Crosstail Link Road and spend elsewhere to the benefit of our communities. Therefore, I intend to remain steadfast in my increasingly popular view and abstain on this occasion.
Thank you very much, Councillor Simpson. Councillor Lane.
Thanks very much, Deputy Provost. I will not take up nearly 5 minutes of this. I've had various thoughts on this project as it's moved forward, and Councillor Forbes is correct. We have had plenty of time to make our minds up on this, and we've had plenty of time to discuss the proposal with officers. He, as convener of Enterprise and Environment, has probably had more opportunity than most. And I welcome his almost road to Damascus-like conversion apparently last Saturday, that he was fully behind the project, which was not what was in the previous Saturday. So I welcome that he has finally given his unqualified support for the project today. I think that's beneficial for us all, and especially for the council. So I would say that on balance, I will be supporting the motion by the leader of the council, and I do hope that it's a hot potato in my ward, but I do hope that it helps push people towards, and I'll use my language slightly better than Councillor Jarvis, it pushes people towards from council officers and other agencies to provide ground at Inverarmond and Broxden to prevent about 4 or 5 mile traffic jams towards Lunkerty every day at 3 o'clock. So I'll be supporting the motion. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lane. And we have the last comment from Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Deputy Provost. The first thing I want to say is that I completely agree with Councillor Purvis about the structure of the report. We're presented with a report which presents all of the benefits of proceeding and all of the risks of not proceeding at this point in time, but doesn't present any fair or balanced, I think, counter argument about what the risks are of proceeding. Politics is obviously, and we will be faced with that in a few minutes when we come to the vote. Politics is obviously a matter of choices. We make choices. We ask questions. We are informed about. We seek to inform ourselves about the issues upon which we speak. My concern is that the Council has not sufficiently informed itself about the issues that arise with the Crosstail Link Road. Other members of the Council, I mean, some will be aware of these issues, but a lot of other members will not be aware of the environmental harm that is going to be created driving the current route of the Crosstail Link Road through irreplaceable ancient woodland, and the consequential effects on protected species. Other members of the Council will probably not be aware that, as Councillor Purvis mentioned, there is £100,000 of money sitting unspent in the capital budget. You can go back to the reports earlier in the meeting that we've looked at for air quality improvement initiatives, specifically at Bridgend and on Athol Street. And I don't think that other members of the Council sadly have properly informed themselves about the public health risks of driving this new route. I mean, we've had this discussion and I made these points before, but in actual fact we were not properly informed. We did not have the public health opinion on driving the route through a brand new housing development, which, as Councillor Barnacle says, is not a definition of good planning, we did not have the benefit of the public health input at that time. And the public health input, as recorded in the comments on the planning application, which is still due to come before committee, is that this is not a good solution in terms of public health. So the choices that we are faced with are the choice of whether to proceed or not, or to pause and inform ourselves properly. As Mr. Marshall said earlier in the meeting, we don't know what the potential change in patterns in response to, I think, Councillor McDade's question, the change in working patterns over time from COVID is. We have at the moment the Scottish Government's R100 programme, we have Her Majesty's Government's Rural Gigabit Voucher Scheme. We could completely change the way that Perth and Kinross does business. We could create a county at ease with itself. We don't have to race down the same track as everywhere else does. We could choose to put that extra junction in from Bertha Park onto the A9. We could choose to make sure that we've informed ourselves about the risk to the communities all up the A93 and A94. So the Gilton, the Balbeggie, Burlton, Woodside, Cooper Angus and Meagle, who are all going to experience enormous increases in traffic in the first year, 12% in just the first year of the operation of the Cross-Tay Link Road. Whether or not the A94, for example, is able to cope with that amount of traffic, that is not the issue. The issue is whether the communities are able to cope with that amount of heavy goods vehicles and traffic rumbling past their doors. These long traditional Scottish villages with children walking to school in the morning, but crossing essentially a trunk road upon which there will be an eighth more traffic in just the first year of operation, and that's only ever going to increase. So in summary, I think that we have not properly taken the opportunity to inform, or other elected members have not properly taken the opportunity to inform ourselves about the risks of proceeding in terms of public health, in terms of the effect on the communities in my ward, on the A93, and particularly the string of communities up the A94 haven't properly taken the opportunity to inform themselves about the risks of driving this road through a new housing development, or the options that are available to us or could be available to us in the future. I think that a pause for a few months to make sure that we are getting this absolutely right when we're spending an eye-watering sum of public money, £120 million for 9 miles of road, is unconscionable, and I will therefore be supporting Councillor Bailey's amendment. Thank you, Deputy Provost.
Thank you very much. I will remind people others later in the day again about the length of time for comments. Thank you. Right, I see there are no further comments. I thank everyone for their comments, and I will now invite Councillor Lyle to sum up. Thank you. Councillor Lyle.
Thank you very much, Deputy Provost, and I'd like to thank members from across the chamber for their comments and their opinions. In respect of the amendment from Councillor Bailey and Councillor McDade, one element that they appear to have not identified in the numerous points that they raised was that pausing the Cross-Tay Link Road may have some issue as far as the Tay City deal is concerned, because the £40 million grant funding from the Scottish Government is included in the Tay City deal, and hopefully that deal will be signed off well before Christmas. And if we delay and pause a decision until February, March next year, it may well put that funding in jeopardy. As far as comments from Councillor Jarvis and Councillor Grant, I think their points are well made around Broxden and Inverarmond, and it's something I have already discussed with the Minister for Transport, or the Cabinet Secretary, apologies, for Transport, Michael Matheson, and he is well aware. Finally, I would like to say that this is a key moment in the story of Perth. I hope members will be able to show leadership and vision, and they will be able to support this motion today. I believe, and I fundamentally believe, that this vote today is vital in Perth's future prosperity, and I hope you'll be able to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lyle. Now we will proceed to the vote, so I will ask Scott Hendry to take the vote.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Councillors, we're dealing with item 5 on the agenda, and more specifically Appendix 2 of the report regarding the Cross Tay Link Road. We have a motion from Councillor Lyle, seconded by Councillor Duff, the terms of which were shared with you on screen. We have an amendment from Councillor Bailey, seconded by Councillor McDade. Again, the terms were shared with you on screen. Before I proceed to the vote, if any member wishes any clarity on the wording of either the motion or amendment, if they could please indicate now. I will now proceed to the vote and ask members to indicate when I call out their name if they're voting for the motion or the amendment. Councillor Ahern.
Motion.
Councillor Anderson.
Motion.
Councillor Bailey.
Amendment.
Councillor Baird.
Motion.
Councillor Barnacle.
Abstain.
Councillor Barrett.
Motion.
Councillor Braun.
Motion.
Councillor Brock. Councillor Brock.
Amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Audrey Coates. Councillor Coates. I'll record that as no vote. Councillor Donaldson.
Motion.
Councillor Drysdale.
Motion.
Councillor Duff.
Motion.
Councillor Forbes.
Motion.
Councillor Gray.
Motion.
Councillor Illingworth.
Motion.
Councillor James.
Motion.
Councillor Jarvis.
Motion.
Councillor Lane.
Motion.
Councillor Lyle.
Motion.
Councillor McCall.
Motion.
Councillor McCall.
Motion.
Councillor McDade.
Amendment.
Councillor McEwen.
Motion.
Provost.
Motion.
Councillor Parrott.
Motion.
Councillor Pover.
Motion.
Councillor Purvis.
Amendment.
Councillor Rebeck.
Motion.
Councillor Reid.
Motion.
Councillor Robertson.
Motion.
Councillor Sarwar.
Motion.
Councillor Shires.
Motion.
Councillor Simpson.
Abstain.
Councillor Stewart.
Amendment.
Councillor Waters.
Motion.
Councillor Williamson.
Motion.
And Councillor Wilson.
Motion.
Scott, I'm coming back in to say mine was going for motion.
I'm reluctant to accept your vote given that it was cast at the conclusion of the vote. However, will be guided by the Deputy Provost and the Provost as to whether they're willing to accept it.
Okay, it was just my microphone's been doing funny things, so. But I'm back now, Scott.
I am willing to accept it because I do understand some members have had difficulty unmuting themselves. So if the Provost is happy with that and there's no objections from anyone else, I'd be quite happy to accept that vote.
Thank you, Deputy Provost.
Yes, I'm of the same opinion that we've all been having problems with the communications. It would be unfair either way. So yes, I agree.
I think Chris has confirmed that she was trying to speak when her microphone was muted. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. On that basis,
I do note that Councillor Lang has said I've set a precedent, but I try to be fair to all members. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Provost. And Provost, on that basis, we have 30 votes for the motion, we have 5 votes for the amendment and 2 abstentions, so the motion is carried. Thank you.
Thank you, members, very much for all your comments on this very, very important motion today. So that is good news. Now we are going to have a break for lunch. So at this stage, you're asked to leave this meeting and you rejoin part 2. And it is now 12:49. So if we make it, we start again at 1:20. Would that be enough time for people to have lunch? Quite happy. So see you all again at 1:20.